welcome to the annual Housing Summit for the San Joaquin Valley Housing Collaborative. Tomorrow is a very full day of amazing learning opportunities and some really amazing panels. And after this learning lab, we have our networking reception, so please stay for that and meet some folks to be even more excited about tomorrow. But for today, we're starting with a collaborative learning opportunity. So this is our first year adding these learning labs to our summit. This is the 14th summit, and we decided to expand. Last year, it was very clear that people were leaving the sessions wanting more, right? Like people want to talk and like, tell me more, tell me more. How does this relate to my work? How do I solve this problem? So we wanted to try to dig in a little bit on that and create some more opportunities for people to really talk about how some of the information impacts you in your work. So I'm so glad you're here. So today's meant to be more casual, more collaborative, asking questions, really digging in all together. So raise your hand, don't hesitate to be involved with us. It's not intended just to be 4 hours of listening. My name is Jessica Hoff-Borzak. I forgot to do that part. I'm a board member with the San Joaquin Valley Housing Collaborative, and so I'm so happy to have you all here. I wanted to put together this panel because I've worked in the space of permanent supportive housing for almost 20 years now. Who actually works in supportive housing? Does anyone know nothing about supportive housing? And you're just interested? Ruben, put your hand down. Okay, I'm curious. Who's a developer? Like any developer types? Property managers. Service providers. Government. Funders. Dang it, I need more of those in the room. And that's the end of the sentence. Did I forget any categories? Any educators? One in the back of the room. Okay, good to know, good to know. So thank you for being here. This learning lab is going to be kind of 3 sections. My goal was to really start thinking about really like a national lens, best practices in supportive housing. And then we're going to get more and more local. So we're going to look at some unique opportunities the state of California has available in supportive housing, and then we're going to work with my friends in Tulare County and hear very specifically about the model that they are currently rolling out around services in supportive housing in that county. So thank you to all of our panelists for being here, for driving to the valley. I turned down the temperature just for all of you in the valley. So we're going to start with Sharon Report. Sharon is the Director for California State Policy at CSH. If you're not familiar with CSH, the Corporation for Supportive Housing, they are really one of the top national think tanks, advocacy organizations, resources to all of us in this space. I have been going to CSH trainings for over 20 years, and I get something new out of every single one, in every state, in every region. Sharon has worked in California policy, working on homelessness for the past 18 years. She's been instrumental in passing CSH-sponsored legislations around health, housing, and social services, justice, child welfare, and in passing funding for programs for housing and services. She has served on multiple councils, including an appointment to Governor Newsom's council. Please join me in welcoming Sharon, and we'll get started.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for that introduction. I guess I don't need to tell you about CSH because Jessica gave such a great introduction. But we are a national nonprofit. We're also a community development financial institution. So we do all those things that she mentioned, plus we do lending. And we've been around 34 years. I think next year's our 35th anniversary. We have like 3 main lines of work. Do a lot of training and technical assistance and consulting work for nonprofit service providers, developers, cities, counties, state, California, the federal government, although a little less of that. That's a long more story. And also, we're really trying to help create a homeless response system that's more effective and workable. And then I do the policy reform stuff here in California, and I have a team of 3 other people as well, and we do legislation as well as implementation work, and so we've done a ton of work around CalAIM, and I'm really glad that you all are going to be talking about that today. And then our lending work, we've lent over $1 billion nationwide for creation of supportive and affordable housing. So that's about us. I'm really hoping today we could talk about just services, give you like a primer. It seems like a lot of you in the room probably know a lot about services, so you can contribute to my presentation. And then also talk about services planning and budgeting. And I'm hoping during the day that you all just jump in, or during this session, because it is like, I have a lot of slides. I'm going to go through kind of quickly the slides in the first part especially, because I think everybody in this room seems to know enough about supportive housing for me not to have to go through it in great detail. But I want you all to contribute as well, and so I'm hoping that if you have a question, a comment, something you want to talk about, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is kind of controversial, and so please feel free to raise your hand, and we don't have to like wait for question sections. Okay, so I am going to give just a real quick overview of homelessness and supportive housing. Again, it seems like probably most of you know all of this already, so forgive me. We do know from lots of data what causes homelessness, and it's unaffordability of housing for people making the lowest incomes. In California, the reason why we have the highest homeless population is because we have really high rents and we have really low incomes. So it isn't rocket science, but lots of times our political leaders treat it like it's some kind of mystery that nobody knows what the cause is. And I think that leads to like the insufficient supply of housing that's affordable to people with the lowest incomes. And that's been a problem throughout our history in California, but especially since the 80s, we've seen just like as federal funding has decreased for housing that's affordable, the state hasn't stepped up in any kind of massive, scalable way to kind of solve for that gap. We also know, that there's inadequate funding for treatment and services, and always has been. And again, a lot of that has to do with stigma, but it's not that the inadequate funding for treatment leads to homelessness. It's just that the people who have disabilities are the most likely to fall into homelessness. So it's kind of like I've heard this comparison of musical chairs. If you have a broken leg, you're not going to get, when they pull away the chair, you're not going to get a seat. So it's very similarly, we see like an overabundance of people with disabilities becoming homeless because they have more barriers to housing stability and usually lower incomes. And then racist policies in the US and in California have led to exclusions of people of color from housing and from building wealth. And so that has contributed as well as NIMBYism, which overlaps also. We say that supportive housing is part of the solution to solving homelessness, and it's not the only solution. We need affordable housing too for people experiencing homelessness. But for people who have difficulties maintaining housing stability, supportive housing is the only evidence-based solution. And it combines affordable housing that's permanent, meaning there's no limit on length of how long somebody could live in the housing. And then it incorporates very intensive, flexible, person-centered services. And I'm just going to go real quickly over these 6 core principles of supportive housing. And these are like very similar and overlapping to the services discussion we're going to have as well. So we really want people to be moving into supportive housing who truly need supportive housing. I think what we've seen in California in recent years is because we've had inadequate funding for services, we're often who probably could exit homelessness permanently with an affordable place to live, but we don't have affordable housing usually for homeless people unless it's supportive housing in California. So that's kind of been the way we've, gotten people into housing. Now that we have coordinated entry, we do see like a lot more people who have serious conditions, who have been cycled between institutional settings and the streets, moving into supportive housing, but that takes us back to the first thing I said, is we don't have adequate funding for services. So that's been an issue. Nevertheless, our mantra is still supportive housing isn't for everybody. It's really for people who are not only low income, but really need the intensive services. And then we really should not be charging people more than 30% of their income on rent. And this is, again, controversial statement. There are a lot of developers who have talked to me about we really can't afford to charge less than 50% of the tenant's income on rent. And I totally get that, but this is the ideal, what we think is important. Because people living in supportive housing, they're still poor. And the more money we have them spending on rent, the less money they have for other necessities. Tenants have the lease and rights and responsibilities of tenancy, and really trying to make the housing as barrier-free as possible. So kind of low barrier, not erecting difficult application processes or excluding people who have been convicted of a crime or who have in the past or who have been evicted in the past, really just kind of like screening in rather than screening out. And then this is the piece we're going to talk more about today, that supportive housing really should be engaging tenants in flexible voluntary services. So voluntary services just means that the tenant doesn't have to participate in the services in order to keep their housing. And then finally, there's coordination with the community. So the services should be connecting people to resources available in the community. That could be food security, child welfare services, supports, and healthcare, of course. Oops, I have two of those, sorry. When we talk about services in supportive housing, a lot depends on the housing itself. Like we do see project-based services where a supportive housing service provider is going to a project or two projects and providing all the tenants with services in that project. And that is a little bit easier to get to and connect to the tenants more regularly. And then there's scattered site, which is rental assistance to private market landlords. So I don't know if anybody's doing that in here. But generally, with scattered site housing, you have to build in extra time for the service provider to go to different places throughout the community. And that, of course, costs more money. And then there are nuances to what kinds of services we provide based on the policies of our state, the policies of local jurisdictions, the extent of NIMBYism, the extent of pushback on some evidence-based approaches like harm reduction. And so I don't know if people have examples of that here locally, nuances that kind of influence what services can be provided. Do we have any thoughts or comments on that? The intent of supportive housing is not to provide housing with resident services. That's not what we're trying to accomplish with supportive housing. It really is the services are a critical piece and embedded in the housing. So embedded in the design of housing, embedded in how we approach the housing project. And it really means the services need to be intensive and flexible and individualized. trauma-informed care. That's something that services should be, kind of have that approach when they're being provided to tenants in supportive housing. But there are overlapping approaches as well, like housing first and harm reduction. All of these have like very similar roots, and it has to do with choice of the tenants, so they get to choose what services they want to participate in. Has to do with really like, providing individualized services. The tenant really is the one driving the train, so they're the ones deciding what goals they want to try and achieve. And the service provider is there to help them get to a place where they can stabilize in housing and not risk eviction. And that may take, them living in supportive housing for the rest of their lives for some people because their disabilities are severe enough. And for other people, they can eventually move on to even private market housing where they're paying their own rent. But it is intended to be a very person-centered, very whole person-oriented approach to housing. And this is where we kind of get into the key principles of housing. So I like to think of it like a burrito, probably because I really love burritos and I have those on my mind a lot. But I think of like all of these principles that I've talked about: harm reduction, trauma-informed care, tools like motivational interviewing and assertive engagement. I'll get into all of that. But they're all kind of like meshed together inside the burrito, kind of informing the flavor of the burrito. And housing first is the tortilla, kind of wraps around all of those core principles and tools, and make sure that each tenant is getting offered the whole flavor of the burrito, not just like one little piece of tortilla. Hopefully that helps. It helps me anyway with visual thinking about how all of these kind of overlap these principles. So I'll start off by describing housing first. How many people have heard the term housing first or feel like they have a good sense of what it is? Okay, good. That's most of you. So I'll go through this kind of quickly. Housing first developed in the 1990s. It was kind of like a rejection of the treatment first approach, which treatment first basically said you have to get well before you deserve to move into permanent housing. And what we found through lots of data is that people didn't get well. So a lot of people who were disabled with behavioral health conditions, they basically could not get well, and so they remained on the street. They, the least functional among people who were experiencing homelessness, just forever stayed on the street, and it was kind of like they were being kind of forced to a lifetime of homelessness. So a psychiatrist found that maybe it would be a good idea to give them some stability before they can actually recover from their behavioral health conditions. And so that's how we got housing first. And the concept is anybody deserves housing, and that goal is to move you into housing to stabilize so you can recover from behavioral health conditions. And now we apply it to anybody moving into supportive housing. So like I said, it's like the burrito. It incorporates like all sorts of principles that existed before, and it also is kind of the essence of supportive housing. The services are individualized to meet the tenant's needs, and this is one thing that a lot of people don't know. There are actually, in order to comply with fidelity to housing first, there are 38 different components. And I think most of us think of, like, we could think of some real top critical ones, but 38 is what we really have to comply with. So I don't know, people, do you have thoughts about what are some of the components of housing first for people who raise their hands? Anybody want to just yell out a couple?
They don't have to be drug-free or medicine compliant.
Perfect, yes. They don't have to be sober in order to move into the housing, and they don't have to maintain abstinence. They can keep using while they're living in their housing. this is true like for me, if I want to use, alcohol or drugs in my own home, I can do that and nobody's going to show up and say you have to do that. So that's a really important one. Other people have thoughts?
Pets. Their pets that they have.
I'm sorry?
Their pets that they have.
Yes, pets, so like not excluding people based on pets. Now, I think some of our state legislators say three Ps, pets, possessions, and I forget what our third one was, but partners, yes, thank you. Yes, so you can have any of those things and you shouldn't be excluded from supportive housing. Some of the other ones are, there's, like I mentioned, you have to assign a lease and comply with rights and responsibilities of tenancy, and people should be educated on that. Housing is not conditioned on participation in services. There's a real push for integration of people with disabilities with people without disabilities. So shouldn't have one big building like, a 50-unit project where everybody inside is like severely disabled, because that kind of gives an institutional feel. What Housing First is the only evidence-based model for solving homelessness. There may be other evidence-based models, but Housing First for solving homelessness is really the only evidence-based model. People do not exit homelessness for good without like that Housing First approach, or at least there's not been another model that's been tested and proven effective. What Housing First is not is housing only, and it's not adequately funded in California. So our state law actually does require 11 components. So when the state funds any kind of housing program for people experiencing homelessness, that program has to require their providers to follow 11 different components. So some of them we mentioned, can't screen people out, you need to screen them in. Applicants are not rejected on the basis of poor credit or lack of rental history or evictions or criminal convictions in the past. Housing providers accept referrals from a variety of sources, can be directly from the street, like people don't have to go to shelter first. And the services emphasize engagement and problem solving, not compliance with the program. Participation is not a condition of tenancy, which you mentioned. Some of these we've already talked about. Basically, the prioritization is for people who really need supportive housing. So like we talked about before. Yes?
At the bottom of a couple slides back, there was a note that it had been codified, and I was trying to get what that code section was.
Yes, it's the HSC code. So if you look in California statute, I'm sorry, no, it's Welfare and Institutions Code, and it's 8255B. So all of these components are listed in here. Yeah, good question.
I have a question.
Yes.
On a couple slides back, I saw something that said one size fits all. What do you mean by that?
It's not one size fits all.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so it's kind of like Housing First is not a one size fits all approach. It really is intended to be based on the needs of that specific person. And then I think harm reduction is a critical component too, and so that's required under state law as well. So all of these little boxes are the 38 components for Housing First Fidelity, and every service provider who is Housing First compliant or is following Fidelity needs to meet all 38. But that's extremely difficult in California, again, because we don't really offer enough funding for housing or services to be able to do that. So I would say that probably most service providers do they're not aware of the fidelity scale of these 38 components. And most, are not able to provide this level of services because we just haven't had the funding to be able to do that. And I would guess that probably a lot of us, including me, like when I first learned about Housing First, I didn't know there were 38 components. Like I thought I knew what Housing First was. I didn't know that this fidelity scale existed.
Question.
Yes.
The ones that you had highlighted yellow, are those the ones that are used most?
These are the ones that the state requires, yes. So thank you for asking that. I should clarify. Yeah, so the ones that are highlighted are the ones that are required under state law for any kind of state funding. But the other ones are the ones that are probably less likely to be compliant. Yes?
Can you flesh out what some of them mean, like assertive engagement or offsite services?
Uh-huh.
So I work at a PSH, I work at 7, and so we, obviously we do some of these, and I'm really curious what else is included that we're not doing.
Yeah, that's, well, I think like some of the things like quickly moving in, that's really hard for us in California because, we have like, even with like coordinated entry, I don't know about here, but where I live in Los Angeles, there's no such thing as quick move-in. Like the documentation process alone, like to even qualify for low-income housing tax credit unit, that takes a long time. And the assertive engagement I'll get to in a second, but the choice and location. So like, ideally we want to give people choice. That's a real critical component of Housing First and trauma-informed care. And it's just not possible lots of times. In most communities, we don't have like 3 or 4 units, in different communities to show people that are available. And then I think in terms of like supported employment services, that's an evidence-based employment services model that I don't know if anybody's heard of IPS in here, but okay. It's kind of like growing, in terms of like supportive housing offering it, and it's basically it's a very similar approach to supportive housing. You like try and get the person into work if they want to work. Try and get them into work as quickly as possible without precondition. But we don't do it a lot here. I'm hoping in the future we do more of it. Nursing services, I think, are rarely offered. And again, because of funding. So I think a lot of these like daily meetings, frequent meetings with people, I think it's just not possible with the staff to client ratio that we have with our services funding to do a lot of these. But I'm going to come back to this chart. Yes?
I was just going to ask how you sort of reconcile frequent meetings and frequent contact with voluntary involvement. So
Right.
it being that they have the option to, get into it or not, or
Yeah.
take part at any given time or not. How to sort of reconcile,
Right.
being available and making sure you're making that contact, I guess, proactively.
Yeah, and that gets to assertive engagement. So let's go to that. I'll come back to these other things. So assertive engagement basically is that you are meeting with the client frequently, and it could be every day, it could be, a couple times a week, but you are just checking in on them, and you're basically asking them, what is it that you want? And so it's really client-driven, and it's intended to get the person to say, I want a new pair of shoes. I want, like, my feet are sore, and I need new shoes. And I did hear a story of one service provider who, this guy had terrible diabetes, and his shoes were so bad that he was at risk of losing his toes. And so, when the service provider approached him on the street, he asked, what do you want? And the guy said, I need shoes. So that's why, it always sticks in my head. But it could be, you know, the person says, I want housing, which is probably a lot of times what people are gonna say when they're still on the street, or in a shelter. But maybe they want something to eat, maybe they're hungry, maybe they need to go grocery shopping. Lots of times people don't know how to cook a meal for themselves. So whatever it is that they say they want, the service provider offers that. And it builds trust that way and kind of like allows the service provider and the client to make that connection that this provider is trustworthy and maybe they could help me with other things too. So the assertive engagement is just never letting go, you know, that client saying, well, they don't want services. I guess they're just a lost cause. It's really like assertively, you know, reaching out to them, but not telling them you have to participate, or it's more like, can I help you with anything? Is there anything you want?
What can I do versus what you need to do?
Exactly, yeah, exactly. They're driving whatever it is that you're offering.
Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to add, I was on the domestic violence housing site in California back when California made the jump to like trauma-informed care and
Oh, right.
housing first in the shelter model. And what we have found helpful is to frame it for folks and teaching service providers, also to frame it for folks as, you know, welcome to our housing. We have this awesome list of menu of services of different things that you could, you know, access. Where would you like to start? And that seems to be a better frame for folks versus this is your schedule
Right.
of services and here's where you need to be. So I think it's often in how it's framed out to
Yeah, that's a great
the tenants.
example.
So as soon as people hear voluntary services and they're like, it gets framed to them in a way that's like, you really don't have to do much while you're here. It's really up to you. It's totally your choice. Like of course, most of us would be like, no more commitments,
Yeah.
you know, to attending things or whatever, so.
Yeah, and I think lots of times people think, oh, services, it means I have to go to meetings.
Right.
So we're really, you know, I think that's a perfect example of like giving them examples of what the service provider could do and allowing them to choose their adventure.
I'm sorry, I know I'm not part of your group, but since you're dealing with voluntary services, and even, you know, no matter how much you frame them, eventually you're going to deal with the sort of, I guess, like environmental decay over time, especially if people just don't want these services, no matter how much of the sort of engagement you're utilizing. I mean, and so that coupled with the fact that these are not, like you said, one-size-fit-all housing solutions, what systems can you even start to conceive of to, you know, take into account this, you know, just the decay of these facilities and these situations over time?
Well, it's a great question. So I do think that lots of times we have tenants in supportive housing who have, you know, behavior issues where they are engaging in behaviors that are risky to their housing, risky to the other tenants. And, I mean, people can be evicted for behaviors that can jeopardize the housing unit or the other tenants.
So there are rules. It's just not
There are
necessarily-
rules, yeah. It's just like if you or I were to live in any apartment, we would have to sign a lease that says, you know, if we destroy the apartment, we'd have to move out. It's the same kind of thing, but the goal is to avoid eviction. So that's like the very last option. But really before then, you want to be engaging with the tenant to prevent that from happening. And engaging with property manager. Like I noticed there were some property managers in here. The service providers and property managers should be working hand in hand to prevent that person from being evicted. And so the service provider can say, like, what are your goals? Or is it your goal to remain here, to remain living here? If so, let's set out a plan for how that can happen. Right now, you're on the path of being evicted. And so I don't want to see that happen. So it's actually a really good question, thank you. There's also the 6 principles of trauma-informed care. Somebody mentioned trauma-informed care for people, for survivors of domestic violence. But this is true for every single person who has experienced homelessness has experienced trauma. And usually before they became homeless, they did, but especially with homelessness. So again, these are going to feel like they're overlapping or saying a lot of the same things. Safety, like building a trusting relationship, trustworthiness. That service provider has demonstrated that they can be counted on, that they have integrity in following through with what they say they're going to do. If you say, I'm hungry, I really need something to eat, and the service provider says, okay, I'm going to go get you a gift card, and they never show up. I mean, that erodes trust, so you always want to follow through with what you say you're going to do. Peer support, what we found is that there's more and more data showing that people with lived experience of homelessness are really critical to the services team because they can build trust more easily, and they've been there, so they know what moving in is like, and it makes it easier for people who've been.
So in your slides, you have two slides. You have assertive engagement, but then a couple slides prior you had non-coercion.
Yes.
So you have a balance there.
Yeah,
Assertive
yeah.
engagement and non-coercion.
Right, so it's assertive, but it's not coercive. I hope that resonates.
Do you elaborate on kind of the core foundation as to was the non, so when you have a creative program and you basically say there's voluntary services and people aren't participating in services that could actually help, was the non, was it making it voluntary to be able to, was that helping the housing first principle? Or by saying these are mandatory, that defeated the housing first principle?
Well, so when it's mandatory, that's counter to housing first. So it may be mandatory for the service provider, just to clarify. Like the provider has to offer the services. The tenant does not have to take them. And the reason why is the treatment first model that we had before was really like a step of like tests to see whether you were worthy for housing. And if you didn't comply with whatever program they had, and usually it was in transitional housing, you would get kicked out. And what they found is a lot of people who had like disabilities were getting kicked out of transitional housing, and they fall back to the streets. And it was really ineffective because you're spending all this money for housing and services, and then people are just going back to square one. The concept of non-coercion, voluntary services is so that the tenant has buy-in. And what we found is actually the coercive model only works for like 50 to 60% of people. And usually those people, are like the most functional. But if you have a voluntary services model, the rates of participation in services is over 90%. It's about 93%. So it's much higher, and that's probably logical if you think about like what you would want. When you go to buy a car, you don't want to be told. I mean, everybody hates going to car dealerships, right? Because you're sold so heavily. Like you have to buy this car, and if you're offered that car and no other cars, you have no choice. You're probably going to be really unhappy with that car. Like maybe it is the perfect color for you and it's the perfect car, but you being told you have to buy that one car is going to make you hate it. It's kind of just like human nature. So if you are the one in charge, you're designing your services package, and the service provider is there to support you, then you're much more likely to engage in services.
Sure. I was going to add something. Marketing is really important, right? So this is the language we apply for funding with, right? And we go to the state to get a new project, and we design these beautiful programs. We operate close to 1,000 units of PSH. If I heard anyone on our team talking about voluntary services, right? I'd write them up. No, I'm just kidding. But that's not how we talk about it at the program level, right? Because that's confusing, I quite honestly think. You've been waiting and waiting and waiting on coordinated entry forever, and you finally got access to housing. Oh, the services are voluntary, right? So I really think about how we market the value of PSH to funders versus how we market the value of PSH to tenants who want to remain housed, who want to perhaps move on, right? And so I try to help you. Right? Like literally this program was developed to help you, and if you don't partake in what we have available, you're not going to keep your housing because you're going to probably end up violating your lease, and that's not what any of us want for you. So I think framing, right, thinking about designing programs versus implementing programs, very different.
Yes. Also, I believe when you build a relationship with a client and then trust you, you decide whether they should go into a PSH program or rapid rehousing. Like there's so many programs that you don't want to set your client up for failure, that you choose the right program that's going to work for them.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's incredibly important. Yes.
And I don't always know the basic services right off, so we mentioned it earlier, continuous follow-up offering programs and services. They actually do need more services than they realize, and that takes a little bit of time. I say this from a property manager's perspective, only because you see them turning down services until they end up in trouble. And then once there is a reason, then all of a sudden they want home.
Yes.
So I think that communication that you mentioned earlier between the service providers and the landlords, it has to grow. So these communication doors have to end up being wide open in the long run. They don't always start out that way. It takes time for those things to grow.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really critical component. I mean, sometimes people are highly distrustful. I mean, I would say that probably the majority of people who've been homeless any length of time is going to be highly distrustful of any, government-funded program, any program that's trying to tell them what to do. And I do think that building the trust means you are going there and you're kind of selling yourself as, I'm here to provide whatever support you need. And just tell me, like, what is it that you want? And trying to fulfill what they want. And that really does go a long way toward building trust. But it could be that a lot of people don't engage in the services until they're in that crisis of like, I'm about to be evicted, So I do think that sometimes it is fear that motivates people. But we, ideally, if we're doing assertive engagement, then ideally they are trusting us before we ever get to the point that they're about to be evicted.
I think the balance is assertive engagement and not having resources to be able to handle your active engagement.
That's the biggest
That's
issue.
that's the imbalance.
Yeah.
And then what you have too, you're also presupposing is you're asking a question where I might not know what it is the offerings are and what potentially can be provided that can be beneficial to me in that sense as well too. So I think that balance of the active engagement that's the imbalance.
Yeah, yeah. And this is all like, I'm saying all of this stuff knowing that there's not really enough funding to do all of this approach. And I think that that's hopefully changing soon. But yes, I'm sorry, there's somebody back there. Let me get him first and then.
I talk about creative programming, right? So for folks who are engaged and you can't mandate them to be a part of something, you really got to create that relational component with them, right? So if we walk and we're very patient with our clients, we're able to find programming that works best for them. I have folks who haven't engaged since they moved in up until recently, so we're looking at almost a year. And we finally got them to feel trusted, trust in us. And now they're at everything I'm doing, right? And so it's also listening and validating. So maybe we have programming that doesn't really work for them based on the time of day or based on, maybe it's a faith-based thing that they want. So you got to be really creative with how you program things. You got to be really active in your pursuit of, not that I want you to participate because I want you to do better. I want you to be a part of something, or I want you to know that we're here for you always. And then we're here when you're ready. And when they show up and you're still there, that shows a lot for our clients, for sure. But I think what's worked best for us is being able to find creative programming and also incentivizing a lot of stuff. We do village bucks. So when people come to something, they get incentivized like you would do in education, right? You would PBIS model, you would have positive strength-based approach to it, and it's worked really well with our
Yeah, I thank you. You said that perfectly. I do think incentives are a big component of assertive engagement. It's not like you're paying somebody to participate in services, but they feel like they're getting something out of it, like it could be a gift card, to a grocery store or something.
Could be quality time, it could be like,
Yeah.
There's so many different options. I think that was a big thing when I was in education with teachers. It's like, why are we paying Jimmy to do what he's supposed to do? It's like, we're helping Jimmy reprogram. Jimmy's been struggling, with his, maybe outbursts for 3 years. You think we're going to beat that by just saying, hey, great job, Jimmy. We got to reinforce some things and create a better understanding of positive behaviors.
Thank you. Yes.
I was just going to say that, the sale doesn't come maybe when we think that it should come. They're not buying in when we think they should come, because they are driving the car, right? And their hands are on the wheel. And that's the idea of this, is allowing the person to dictate their own future or direct their own future. So the sale may not come when we think it's supposed to come, or we're because of our jobs and our positions, we're told that this is supposed to happen on a timeline that we expect it to happen on, and it just doesn't, because these are other people's lives that are, they're driving.
Yeah.
So, and also when somebody is living in permanent supportive housing, and the engagement is so important to keep showing up, because you have, and especially in the beginning, the nervous system has to calm down because of all the trauma from living on the streets, right? We can't necessarily make those best decisions, or what we think are their best decisions for them in their life, at a time when they're coming out of a chaotic lifestyle, always, subjected to trauma from living on the street. It takes time. So, like, our bosses don't say, we need to get this done by this time. It doesn't happen like that. In real life, you have to keep coming back. I worked with folks for 5 years, and it wasn't until after 5 years, they said, hey, Jen, remember that thing you kept telling me about? Like, if you guys do that. Hallelujah! It almost took 5 years. That's okay, though. We're building those relationships and that trust, and we really are building communities. And I wish that, especially workers would think of it that way. We're building communities. We're not just talking in 8 to 5, right?
Right.
We're building communities and trust and relationship with folks.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yes.
I have a question, Rachel, you've been raising your hand.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
We've been going around the room. So, two things actually after your comment about the nervous system in particular. The first being that, like, I worked in not permanent supportive housing, but in low-income tax credit, 100% affordable, and I had a couple move-ins who just the shift from being on the street to stability sent them to the hospital. Literally, that shift was too much for them to take, and they had full-blown panic attacks, or they just went and just stopped and checked out. And so I had a couple instances where just that shift was so traumatic in and of itself. And I think that, having been more lenient with them and doing things more on their terms would have helped to alleviate that and not have that happen. And then the other is on the topic of knowing your audience. We are typically dealing with folks who have been burned by these programs in the past. Like, in some way or another, some program that was meant to help them either stop getting funded, or they got taken off on some technicality, or however they feel about it. So their idea of stability is going to be making it on their own, whatever that means, versus accepting this and taking that for what it is, because it could just be, okay, we're going to move you in, but then we're going to find a reason to get you out.
And plus, if the person feels like the service provider is telling them what to do instead of them, driving the train, and the process, and like we were saying, it could take a very long time for them to build up that trust to actually want those services. It does, I think for a lot of people, it does feel like you're trying to tell them what to do and trying to would say for the example you gave of the couple who just were so traumatized by the move into housing, that's where peer supports can be really helpful too. And I have a friend who does this work, as a peer support specialist, and lots of times he is talking about like how he tells people as they're moving in, like this is going to be really hard. It's going to feel harder to you than you think it's going to feel. So I do think that that's one way to kind of blunt some of those traumatic effects. Thank you.
I was just picking back off of what Heather said, in your audience. If a lot of our residents we know don't wake up until 10, 11, there's no way I'm going to make an event at 8 in the morning and expect them to be there ready. So it's just having the service providers being flexible with the times that they're doing their workshops and peer supports to make it more available for those tenants. Because some of them do want to show up, it's just if they're tired, they're not going to show up or absorb anything.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. That's where it's individualized, you have to meet the tenant needs. Okay, so harm reduction, I'm guessing everybody's heard that term. So harm reduction, it really is a public health approach, so vaccines are harm reduction, abstinence can be harm reduction. It's just really, it's again driven by the person, what works for them or what path they want to take toward recovery. And so it really is non-judgmental support. And again, not coercion, really trying to help somebody, get to the point where they are causing less harm to themselves or to the community. So if it is about using drugs, then and that is causing behaviors that could lead to eviction, then harm reduction approach may be, let's work together to figure out like how you could reduce your use so that you don't engage in these behaviors. So that really harm reduction is around like trying to avoid risky behaviors. Yes.
I was in another training session more about harm reduction because I'm not a clinician or not my area, but I thought it was really helpful because I think most people think of harm reduction, they think of like needle exchange, they think of like pretty controversial programming, but they gave us the example of harm reduction is a bar. Like a bar is harm reduction because it has licensed, trained people who are dispensing that substance of choice. There are limits to how long you can be there. You can't be overserved. If you present a certain way, they'll get you medical aid. So I think it's just really interesting to reframe around harm reduction that like actually there's like seatbelts are harm reduction. Like we do lots of harm reduction things all the time that don't equate to the very controversial things.
You're absolutely right. And this can apply to other situations, not just drug use or alcohol use. But it's good to just keep in mind that the primary goal is to improve the person's health. Okay, we talked about assertive engagement. Motivational interviewing is really just like setting goals with the client and then setting a path toward meeting those goals. So if the client wants to work, for example, you can work with the client, again, it's very collaborative, to work with the client to get them to the place where they are working. And that is where the supportive employment services comes into play. But another example could be, I want to go back to school. Well, the case manager can work to help them get back to school. What do you need to get there? Maybe you need to reduce your use of drugs or alcohol to get there. So that might be the first step. But it is really offering them choices and so that the client can make their own choice. And then, I think we want, the last principle is really around inclusivity and really, again, making sure people who are living in supportive housing really do need supportive housing and that the outcomes are equitable. Equality, practices do result in positive outcomes, which I'm sure everybody in this room has stories of positive outcomes. So we know that they can, supportive housing does result in really positive outcomes, especially if the services provided are at high quality. So we're going to move on to service planning. So when we talk about planning for services, we're talking about like a written plan for the organization to kind of assess like what services they're going to provide to whom, how, what staffing level is needed, and what the goals of the services are. But it's also, you know, informs the tenant's own services plan. So there should be a services plan for the tenant as well. And so in approaching planning, just really thinking about what is consistent with your mission as an organization. Like what are the services that will promote your ultimate goals as an organization? What is the tenant's role? How do they inform what your services plan says? How are you accountable to the supportive housing project, the community of the project? How are you accountable to the larger organization and to the funder? And then how will you be delivering culturally specific services? An important part is like, you know, staff to client ratios. We'll talk about that in a second. But again, it should start off with like the ultimate goal. What is the goal? And then working your way back. And the ideal tenant journey, you know, should inform your services plan. You may not be providing all of these services. So maybe you're not doing outreach services, but as service providers, you, ideally, the service provider who is providing services in the housing is a service provider who is providing services before the person got housed. And there's at least some transition there or a warm handoff. And then the services plan should also identify how the services are connecting to services in the community, to healthcare, to aging and home supportive services, employment services we talked about, substance use, how to teach tenants about financial management, how to pay their rent on time, how to get along with the landlord, the neighbors. That can be the service provider doing those activities, but it should also include like the broader community of service providers that we may not think are like homeless service providers, but are providing services to that tenant as well. The services can be provided in housing, and there should be some home visits included when you're thinking about drawing up your services plan. How many times are you visiting the tenant in their home? And how many times are you providing services in the community where the tenant wants to meet? And that should be a critical component. And there should be minimal time where a client has to come to you in an office or a clinical setting. What impacts outcomes, you know, really drives like your services plan. So the staffing ratio, the mix of staff. So do you have a team-based approach? And if so, who's on that team? And how do you balance the folks on the team, the services you're providing? What populations are you serving? And that is lots of times driven by funding. But depending on the population you're serving, you're going to want to assess like what kind of services model do you need to be providing. And then finally, what is the tenant's engagement with the services plan at the individual level and with the organizational services plan? And staff training is critically important to all of this. So there should be some kind of assessment of how often you're going to be training your staff on your services plan.
Sharon, and I know you're going to get into funding a little bit more, but when you talk about service plans, we just talked about how there's not enough funding for a high fidelity service plan. So I guess my question is, do you recommend that you write a service plan that's ideal, that's real, or do you write a service plan, I guess that's ideal or real?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say you have to be It's a way for you to show your funders what you're doing, but it's also a way for you to be accountable to the tenants and to the staff. So if you're saying, we have, a service, staff to tenant ratio of 1:20 and it's really 1:35, then you're not really being accountable to either your funder or your tenant or your staff. So I do think it has to be real, but I would love your opinion on that.
I mean, I think it's hard because sometimes you have to meet a certain threshold to be funded,
Yeah.
right? There's expectations. And then I think a lot of times what we experience is, providers just can't, no single provider can do everything that's going to be needed, right? So how you, and I know we're going to get into CalAIM and all these funding models, right? But the real is like, how do you layer all this, right? And it gets really complicated.
Yeah, very complicated. And CalAIM does not simplify. This does this way.
Spoiler alert for the rest of the session.
So the other part is collecting data. We promote heavily collecting data. One way is through tenant satisfaction surveys. Another way is just, like by seeing the outcomes that your tenants are achieving. What kind of outcomes are they able to achieve with the services? Yes.
Just kind of piggybacking on what you said in terms of layering different supports. I know I work for one of the regional centers in California, and so what we find is that our individuals that have intellectual and developmental disabilities have a variety of service providers that they already access. And so instead of dealing with their housing issue in a silo, it's really looking at who they already have in place in their circle of support and including those different agencies and service providers. The regional centers already do an individualized program plan. We already do. We have supported living services. We have different, services and supports that are already being funded. And if the individual has, they may be able to live independently with just being able to have a payee that helps them make sure they pay their rent on time. Or they might be able to work. But they might need 24/7 individualized support. And all of that is based on what those generic resources and what other services are already receiving from the community in that layering.
Right,
model.
absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%. Like you have to be looking at what are the resources in the community and collaborating with that, with those resources.
Well, and I would add that's where tenant targeting is so important because I agree, if you're working with ED, it's like you're going to be targeting tenants that come with a set of services that a homeless, non-disabled person does not. And so I think it's really important to look at who you're aiming to serve, because you're right, there are groups within our homelessness world that already have much more robust services, and that means what you need to plan for is very different, right?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Thank you. Okay. So staffing models, and I just, as of just acknowledging that we are living in a different world where people are homeless longer now in California than they've been before. Median is 22 months now. And coordinated entry systems have led to people with more complex, sometimes more acute conditions living in support housing. So understanding all of that, I'm going to skip over the slide for a little bit. And we talked about peer supports. It's really incredibly important what you said about really trying to layer in all of the resources that already exist. And there are multiple resources that do exist, from the healthcare system, the social services system, you mentioned regional centers. The tenant should be at the center of that and seamless to the tenant. The tenant shouldn't have to keep track. Oh, I'm getting CalAIM community supports for this person, but I'm getting enhanced care management from this other person. It should be So I'm going to talk a little bit about ACT, which is assertive community treatment. Is anybody in here familiar with ACT, or do ACT? Okay, great, thank you, people. I find that in California there are very few service providers who know about ACT because it's not funded very often in a lot of our counties, but that may be changing. So I'll talk about that. Assertive community treatment is a team-based model. It's very intensive. It's intended for people with severe mental illness or substance use or co-occurring disorders. It's, like I said, very intensive, so the staffing ratio is 1 to 10 or lower. So I've talked to service providers who have like a staffing ratio of 1 to 8. You're basically, when the tenant is new to the housing or new as your client, you're meeting with that person every day, sometimes multiple times a day. It's 24/7 access to the service provider, and most of the time the service provider's in the community, so they're rarely in an office, and some service providers don't even have offices who do that. It is an evidence-based model, and it is associated with the greatest outcomes in supportive housing. When we compare ACT with supportive housing, we see like amazing outcomes of people going from like severe schizophrenia to, you know, employment, working, living on their own and paying their own rent. So it is like tremendous model, gets amazing results. But it's really expensive because it has that really low staff to tenant or client ratio. So it does include a clinical expert. It's usually a psychiatrist, and then it can be a licensed clinical social worker, a psychiatrist, because we have like a real shortage of psychiatrists in California, but it can be an LCSW. And then lots of times there's a nurse on the team. Peer support specialist, a case manager. A housing specialist is kind of like a unique position that's consistent with Housing First Act, and there's actually fidelity scale for that as well. And but housing specialists are rarely included in behavioral health created ACT programs. So that's something that, again, if you were to collaborate resources with your county behavioral health agency, they can fund ACT services, and you, as a service provider, could be offering a housing specialist to be on that team. Let's see. It does have really strict fidelity requirements, and usually you're not considered an ACT team unless you meet those fidelity requirements. As I mentioned, frequent interactions with the client, but also frequent case conferencing with the team. So the team gets together daily, usually, especially after people, you know, if a supportive housing project is leased up and you have a couple of tenants who are receiving ACT, then the team would be case conferencing like, you know, every day for a while. The services do taper off over time, but it's really, really intensive. I'm sure I've said that 50 times now. But the concept is really, you know, like, for those of you who have now faced like supportive housing projects where you have tenants inside the supportive housing who are really causing a lot of problems for the other tenants and for your units, maybe causing a lot of damage to the units, kind of like what you were talking about before, maybe really at risk of eviction, maybe yelling in the middle of the night, you know, obscenities or something like that. These are the people who should be connected to ACT. And the fact that we haven't had enough ACT teams in counties has really hampered supportive housing's ability to respond to those tenants. Intensive case management is also an evidence-based model, and it's not ACT, but it's like a couple steps down from ACT in terms of intensity. So intensive case management can be either a team model or individual model. And typically, So this is more like a 1:15 ratio, one staff person per 15 tenants. And it's for people who have less severe conditions, but also have disabilities, either behavioral health or a combination of disabilities. On the individual side, usually they are bringing in those other services that are available in the community to supplement their whatever services they're providing. And I think the biggest criticism of ICM is that it varies considerably. Like one ICM team is one ICM team. Like it's just not a good example of any others. So there's a lot of variety and not a lot of standardization. And there isn't like a fidelity scale you have to meet like you do with ACT. Critical time intervention is very intensive services for a set period of time. So it is basically, usually it's 9 to 12 months, and the person really before they even get housed, the service providers have relationships with lots of community support service providers. So they know the places that work on food security. They have good relationships with a lot of healthcare providers. They have slots that they work with behavioral health providers to get their clients into behavioral health treatment. They've already like set up those networks and kind of like you were talking about, regional center services. Whatever that person needs, they are going out and forming those relationships and connecting the tenants to those service providers who exist in the community. And for 9 to 12 months, they're intensively working with the tenant to get them to kind of like stand up on their own and have those relationships with the service providers in the community as well. So there is kind of a model that's set out for critical time intervention where before they even get housed, they have a relationship with the service provider, and then the work begins to really intensively connect those people to providers, other service providers in the community. And then they are kind of on their own for a while with support from the service provider, but the services are kind of tapering off in phase 2. And 3 is like when the service provider is just kind of handing off the responsibility to provide services to that tenant, to the community support services. So it is like, we see that that the places that have done critical time intervention have really excellent results. But again, this model also varies considerably, and there are very, very few places who do it and who know how to do it. It takes like special skills and training. And then finally, tenancy support services. These are like your HUD-like services models where it's basic case management and you're doing all the things we talked about, like helping somebody pay their rent on time, helping somebody connect with their landlord, and get along with other tenants. Really providing like community foundational support, so connecting tenants to people in the community. But it's not very intensive. It's 1 to 20 is the ratio. And this is what Caldane Community supports. This is the basic concept that is included in the housing tenancy support services as part of Caldane. And again, it is connecting people to resources in the community, but it's just not as intensive as like critical time intervention. And for this model, there really isn't evidence to show whether this model is effective or not. I think these are very traditional supportive housing services, so in that way, we probably could say to the extent that supportive housing has proven successful, these services are proven successful as well. But the model itself, just the services alone, haven't really been studied or evaluated very well. Okay, I'll stop there for a second before we get into funding and see if anybody
team, from the beginning, is there like a role for the family? Like, do we ever bring in family members? I know when I used to do case plans, we used to have like one person that the person would identify, would be like a support person.
Right.
I don't know what role family plays in
Yeah.
this model.
Yeah, I mean, I think lots of times, yes, definitely family support is critical if the tenant wants that. But I do think lots of times that's happening even before they get housed, because lots of times, you know, like diversion service is the first thing the homeless response system is asking people is, you know, do you have family you could live with? But I do think, you know, to your point, it's an important element for a lot of people. Lots of times they've broken relationships with their family, and reconnection with family is a critical piece of what they want to achieve. But lots of times, you know, they don't want to be reconnected with family. So in that case, you kind of have to follow the tenant's lead. Yeah, a good question. So I know I'm over time, I'm sorry. But yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry. In terms of like the team dynamics and staffing and that sort of thing, how would or do you recommend even including like volunteer services, people from the community who are willing to just kind of come in and offer given services for things that they specialize in or things that, you know, they do for a job outside of that job?
Yeah, I think that's really important for like the community activities, you know, as I didn't talk about that, but we really want to see supportive housing building in activities that they're doing in their housing community. And so the volunteers are really important part of that lots of times. Like I know of a building who brings in like a hair cutting school, cosmetology school, and they give everybody, you know, haircuts, they do their nails, that kind of thing. And so it's, I think lots of times it's like a really critical part of like connecting people to community. It's a good question, thank you. Okay, so services funding. I just wanted to touch on, I know you guys are going to learn about CalAIM from one of the other speakers, Tessa, but I just wanted to like mention, like the state is undergoing health transformation in general. So CalAIM is Medi-Cal transformation. There's also behavioral health transformation. And behavioral health transformation is something the state is doing through both the revision of the Mental Health Services Act. Does everybody know MHSA, this room? Does that sound okay? I figured it would sound familiar. And so, you know, with Proposition 1, which we Californians voted on last year, one component of it is that Mental Health Services Act is becoming a Behavioral Health Services Act, and that's starting in July 2026. Planning for that is going on right now. An important component of that is that full service partnerships are changing. So they will no longer be full service partnerships kind of like, you know, varying model from one county to the other. Full service partnerships have to provide evidence-based services models. And so assertive community treatment is included in that, as is intensive case management and IPS, which is individualized placement supports. That's the employment services we talked about. And all of those three things have to become part of full service partnership. So if you haven't made friends with your county behavioral health folks yet, go make friends with them, because this is a really good way that you could start bringing assertive community treatment into your supportive housing. And those teams that are created at the county level, you can add in your services as a housing specialist to the ACT team, so that you can start providing ACT to some of your tenants who need it. And same with intensive case management and IPS. There's also Behavioral Health Connect, which is through Medi-Cal, really important program that is in 28 different counties, I believe, and it also funds these same services. And so counties are kind of testing out those models before BHSA starts next year. A challenge I'll just mention real quickly around Cali and community supports is there are a lot of challenges to it, but one of the challenges is the time. So under Cali and community supports, the funding is often provided by the managed care plans. The funding is limited because the managed care plans don't actually get money up front to fund the services. And so they want to see return on investment. And so lots of times they have been limiting how long somebody can get community supports for, and that can be as low as like 12 months and as high as like 2.5 years. And so that makes it hard to like get those supports connected to housing or integrated into housing because, yeah, as you all know, when you get funded for housing, you have to commit to providing services to tenants for, usually a lot longer than 2 years. It's usually 15. So that has become a challenge, and we do believe that we need to create community supports as a Medi-Cal benefit, which would mean all the managed care plans would have to provide these community supports, and they would get funded upfront to provide those services. There are a lot of federal programs out there that service providers may not be aware of. Some are offered by HUD, but also the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration offers grants to provide services. And because they're focused on people with behavioral health conditions, they will often fund grants to do things like assertive community treatment and intensive case management. State and local resources, the state provides some resources to counties to provide services to people, child welfare involved families, through Adult Protective Services for older adults, through Department of Workforce Investment, for people who are maybe eligible for and applying for SSI. So there are a number of programs that are kind of these small niche programs that are funded by the Department of Social Services at the state level that you could be taking advantage of. This is just some of the programs. I'm not going to go through all of those. But if we combine, and this is the key to what you were talking about, like looking at all the resources available in your community, combining the resources, kind of making this burrito, out of the principles, but also the funding sources, then we can get to meeting a lot more of the housing first fidelity components. So just wanted to kind of end on that note, and we still may have gaps, but you could see a lot more of these boxes are highlighted, especially if we're combining like ACT services, intensive case management, community supports, and enhanced care management. The last thing I'll just mention really quickly is on our website we have a budgeting tool. So you can go on that tool and identify like how much it will cost to provide certain models of services. And ACT, ICM, and housing tenancy supports are all included in the budgeting tool. So it's at this website. If you just Google actually supportive services budgeting tool CSH, it'll pop up too. Okay, so that's all I have except for the breakout discussion. Do you want to take a break?
Yeah, so I think we will, I was impressed, we caught up. We're not that far over time. I thought, interesting to me, going back a few slides, I had never thought of it quite this way, but you had a small bullet point that said, housing is looking for a commitment to service 15 years of services that are tied to the unit. And I've never thought of it quite that way, but that's true, right? We just want services that are on site all the time, right? more and more complicated, that's a good distinction to think about. Like, we want services for the unit, no matter who lives there, right, as they come and go, and that's an interesting shift.
And for the healthcare system is always for the person,
That's
for the
right.
individual.
That's
So it
right.
makes it really hard to mesh those two.
That's right.
And one of the reasons why we would like to see a Medi-Cal benefit is because that way the eligibility could be tied to who's eligible for the
Right.
benefit, for the housing. Like you could say, every unit in this project, and you have to be eligible for the benefit in order to be eligible for the housing.
Right.
And that way, even if the unit turns over, the services are still available
Right.
there.
And you can do some of that. I mean, with
Yeah.
coordinated entry, right, like, you can play with matching, right, the tenant, because it's not going to be good for anyone, right? If we're taking tenants that have zero potential for service dollars, right, if no one can fund them. So we have seen some of that as we kind of push on coordinated entry and some of the traditional, just first on the list, a little bit more of a, well, let's think about where you're going to succeed, which again, takes away choice. So again, it's not necessarily perfect fidelity, but it's maybe more real. So, okay, we're going to take maybe a 5-minute break, come back together. Sharon brought some kind of just discussing questions, so we're going to encourage you to come back and talk amongst yourselves, do a little brainstorming, problem solving of what you've seen, and then we'll keep moving to the next section with looking more in depth at Cal 8. So, help yourselves, 5 minutes.
There's a seat up front if you want to go sit down on it. Hi. Hi, I know.
That was like,
She can run over me further too. It's okay.
Yeah, that ISP thing, did you guys know about that? Yeah. Just like popped up recently, and there's this fun thing that's like, I think recently the house guy or whatever. Yeah.
THCS is doing, they have a grant out right now. Purpose, tax money or something, but it's one of the funding categories is job placement.
Sorry.
It's all once you convert or get a tenant out of Pittsburgh, job placement though, there's only a few companies that really specialize in doing that. It's an interesting question. I think there's companies that are aging contracts here. There's a couple companies that just
I guess I wish we had.
So, right, like,
For some, it does work, but not
yeah, well, I just don't know that it's too deep. I don't know that it's
Right, so like, okay, we'll fund it, we'll help pay for it, if we should kind of easy manage it, so this can stay in place. Genius, right, like, cause turnover in place is so costly, right, so I was like, I like the more employers involved. Yeah, that's.
There's a lot of dollars for apprenticeships and internships, and so these companies start using those dollars for other things.
Yeah. Right, like if we're helping someone, right, like, the employer should be a part of it. I mean, it's gonna have to too, but you know, one step at a time.
That's right. Some of the others, it's good, right? It seems like it's right.
Yeah.
You might have seen me at the SJBC virtual webinar. Yeah, it's my profile on.
And this is so actually. I'm not, how are you? This thankfully enough to be. I was telling her. Yeah, she's like, I'll ask you tomorrow and you're with me. I didn't know. How was your drive?
Oh, I actually flew up here. Yeah.
Was it like an hour?
No, there were no direct flights. So they took me to San Francisco, and then I was to flight. Yeah. Like, if they were trying to take me to another state, I would have. But honestly, like, I get sleepy on long drives, and so that's why I was like, I drive. Even if it did take me down the time. The layover was honestly long enough for me to just get to the end. The only one that actually held up time was the fact that when I was on the plane, I made it around the lot for like 35 minutes.
I was telling her, I mean, I'm distinct levels of care.
I mean,
I just don't like them
it was
because
kind
people
of
are not that
interesting, but I just can't spend the
step
time.
down. You just run out of a set of services to provide and tear on each other. Trying to attach different treatment models and stuff. I mean, having to attach to fun. Like, this video is very short, this level of care is having to just create programs or something that just didn't reach out.
Because we have oral
Someone's not there anymore, something like this.
Yeah. Oh, that might have been. Sitting back there. That might have been my but I'm on multi-family residential sectors. Yeah. Thank you. All right.
Hey, what's up, man? How you doing?
All right, come in together. I do want to give you all a heads up. These are the unbelievably cute shirts that we put together for this housing summit, and I think they're going to go fast. So I'm telling this group first, go get them. Because I think we're going to sell out tomorrow. We actually have way more attendees than we were anticipating. So if you think it's as adorable as I think it is, get it today. Tell them they're ready to party. You can absolutely wear them. They are free. Yeah, it's a fundraiser for the class. So. All right, so who would agree that supportive housing is hard work? Yeah, I've been doing this 20 years and I'm listening to these slides and I'm like, so that's why we're here, right? To brainstorm and collaborate together. So Sharon's going to walk us through kind of an exercise together. And we're going to shrink it a little bit so we have time for the rest of our time. Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay. You each have on your table a piece of paper. I'm sorry I didn't take enough copies for everybody. It says to get groups of 4 to 6, but I really anticipate a smaller crowd. So just I think at your tables, you're just going to read through this and pick one of these options. So you could either share, your table's going to decide which of these options you want to choose. You could share a specific experience when you needed help or support and how you got that help and how you felt when you got it, what ended up helping you to whatever situation you needed help with. Or you can discuss a specific real issue that arose in supportive housing and how your team addressed it. And then the last option is, there's a scenario here, and so one of your team can read the scenario, and I have a couple extra copies. And then for any of those two, you're going to answer the questions. And I think because we have less time, why don't you answer 3, 4, and 5, and just cut out 1 and 2. So does everybody understand, like you're just going to pick either time that one of you needed support and how you got that support, or a situation in a real life situation that support housing project that you listening, or the scenario that is here, which is basically a scenario of supportive housing that were kind of disruptive to housing. And what you choose, what services model you use, and like, just answering questions. And then we'll get back together. I don't think we have time for every table to report out. So just a couple tables if you want to report out. We can do very quick. Get back together. So you have, yeah, 15 minutes.
I was trying to give a thumbs up back here.
That I is like 5 minutes away from there.
question one is, what service we all have to address and anything else?
I served on the board for 5 years, and then for last year. Some of our community people. Oh, okay. Well, glad you're okay.
You're like, this is what I do this morning. The question is services, what types of services would be appropriate to connect the two people who are struggling with childhood disability as well as the two people pending two units that are open and are trying to find.
I drove by and saw the building, I was like, oh, yeah, I thought about that. We had several of them. That's one of my favorites about the and then also on our street. Restaurants
People that are waiting might also even need like transportation, they might need, right, like subsidies or things like that, so like housing allocation, sure with transportation, yeah. Outreach, all of that. So like, going around
Probably not. No. There's a worksheet. Yeah.
almost like a team treatment. So it's like property management represented, service provider, tenant leaders, and sometimes there's owners reps. And like having a group discussion about this has come to a point where you're housing here, and going back to what you're saying about and I'm trying to see if you can educate, especially you, Marianne, about what to do for future.
It's like, I can download your brain. Yeah, I can download your brain.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly, right.
especially everywhere it's always set up like, oh, I have to remember.
What is that? sitting down with each of the with their case manager or with the case manager and have the discussion. I always had a situation reminds me of one of our sites here, and we had a gentleman that just moved in with their season, but really stabilized, right? Like he started to get reports from the police that they were going to use for hours calls for him to be like 2-3 years and of course, we all went to the conclusion that like, is this gonna work? Is he gonna understand like the police? Is he, and when we finally got in touch with him, and he was having anxiety at night because like we did 6 months straight for each street, right? Like the nighttime was so used to being exposed, and so got hired like $5 at home and just never matched up. So like sometimes I would have to so think through it and like assuming that someone's like so out of control that they, you know what I mean, that there isn't like just a simple fix. And sometimes when like things are like service to the time of morning, you know what I mean? And it was how it was. And you're in adjust. I didn't see the video. I watched it.
Oh, I like games, but I'm not really
Right? Like I'm saying, I also So I am like constantly.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and get back together? Okay, thank you. So does anybody want to share out what they talked about? Did anybody do the first one, the specific experience where you needed help or support? You feel comfortable sharing? Well, does anybody?
Okay. We had a couple of scenarios that we shared. One was one member of our table had reached out to our COC with a question about how to handle something and just felt like she'd asked it 100 different ways and different times and just wasn't getting the info she needed to help the resident she was trying to work with. And so, yeah, the feeling was just like discouraged and feeling, relating that to how residents might feel when they can't get a concrete answer on something. So that was one. We had a few other examples too. But.
Okay, all right, that's a great one. Did you come up with any answers about which services model could work to kind of address?
We didn't get that far.
Okay, that's okay. Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to share out? Anybody else have like a specific example that they were talking about?
So we did the first question. First question was share a specific experience where you needed help or support.
Right.
So what we talked about was a couple things, which was pre-tenancy, post-tenancy, centralized service providers, and decentralized service providers. And the communication and the transparency of that communication of who the stakeholders are in those various settings. And the lack of transparency of trying to figure out kind of who are the stakeholders and who do we talk to in order to be able to help residents. And because ultimately what we're trying to do, we talk about service providers, we talk about property managers, we talk about being able to support residents' needs. And so residents are kind of having to navigate this, and then each is kind of operating in a silo. And the struggle is, how do we make the communication more transparent of who the stakeholders are within a given environment? We talked about, we have excess demand and not enough resources, but within the resources that we have, there's a communication gap in being able to actually help targeted audiences. So when you have a centralized approach on a specific community and it has a specific group, then you know that, but you also don't know potentially, what we talked about before is prior and or other service providers that are actually helping that resident as well too. It's just having a holistic approach of who are the stakeholders in order to be able to help people.
And I'm sure you solved all of that in the 15 minutes that you had.
We did.
Congratulations.
Very good job, thank you. And anybody else want to share what you're talking about?
I have some solutions that popped off the top of my head, like to be able to duplicate your services or be able to make an extension of yourself, like something as simple as a flow chart, so that folks are able to self-navigate. Of course, you have to teach them like how to use it, or maybe as they're leasing up, you have this conversation, but a flow chart, so that they know how to contact the right person for the right thing. And then another thing, and I know this might be a little bit controversial, but a chatbot, right? So a chatbot feature written into your webpage, so that if they have questions that could be easily answered, like what happens if I pay my rent late, or what if I'm past the fifth, or like just simple, every frequent questions, and then have the chatbot field those things, and then maybe it also provide an additional like service number if there's, my pipe's busted, who do I call? And then it's like, hey, you call this number. But those might be solutions that, thinking outside the box of like what we would traditionally think somebody has to be in a position to be able to field those questions, maybe not. So, things like
And what's your phone number if you want to?
consulting services.
We developed Chat GPT for we're going to thank you, Sharon, first of all, for coming to Fresno. And I will give a plug. CSH has really phenomenal training tools on their website. They have a whole center. It's actually very reasonably priced. So I highly encourage you get on their lists and participate in more trainings. Maybe through the collaborative we can get them back to the valley more often. So. Okay, so we're going to move now into understanding a little bit more about CalAIM. If you were at this conference last year, we talked about how Prop 1 was going to change everything and BHSA was changing everything. A year prior to that, right, we were hearing that CalAIM was going to be this golden goose of fixing all of our service needs in permanent supported housing. I haven't yet seen that. I'm not sure if anybody else feels like everything is perfect now, because it's just more complicated. I do think we have a lot more opportunities, but it's a lot more complicated. And especially some of you are at sites, right, just dealing with the very real realities of being with tenants and with clients. So I'm going to introduce Tessa first. Tessa is a postdoctoral researcher at the Turner Center up at Berkeley. She works on the intersection of housing and homelessness, including projects related to increasing the effectiveness of PSH, how we align housing and health funding, and improving how rental assistance is provided to families experiencing homelessness. And then we also have with us today Swamini. Got that right, didn't I?
Yes.
Swamini comes to us from working on implementing CalAIM up in some northern counties that the SJBHC does not represent. Santa Cruz, Monterey, Alameda. She's trained in general medicine and actually has a master's in gerontology, and she's recognized for building strong cross-sector partnerships that advance housing and healthcare integration. She's working on innovative initiatives in PSH with numerous developers and community response support teams. And I like this. Her bio says that she believes CalAIM represents a transformative model, one rooted in strong foundations and continually evolving to create a future where housing and healthcare are more seamlessly integrated. So with that, I will turn it over to Tessa.
Thanks, Jessica. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, that's great. Hi, everyone. I'm Tessa. So great to be with two bigger picture shifts that are happening behind the scenes with CalAIM. The first is a shift from fee-for-service to managed care. So in the old system, the fee-for-service system, providers got paid per visit or per service. In the new managed care system, the state basically contracts with health plans who get a monthly payment per person to deliver more coordinated care. So CalAIM is part of this managed care model. The second shift is that we're adding social supports to Medicaid. So historically, Medicaid couldn't pay for things like housing and food. But with federal waivers, California can now cover non-medical supports like housing services through CalAIM. So that really changes how we think about Medi-Cal, right? Because initially you kind of think of it as just a healthcare delivery system, but now we're really moving towards a health and social support system. So CalAIM depends on federal Medicaid waivers, specifically 1115 and 1915B. It gets really complex really quickly. I'm not an expert in all of this, but what's really important to relay is the waivers are time limited, and they're set to expire at the end of next year, December 31st, 2026. So if California wants the CalAIM programs to continue, the state has to renew the CalAIM program with CMS, which is the federal Medicaid agency. And we're going to... Thank you. Is it on? Can folks hear me? Brandon, need your help. Oh, there it goes. Okay.
Not sensitive.
Okay, great. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the renewal process momentarily, but I just wanted to flag that. So CalAIM covers a wide range of reforms to Medi-Cal, more than we're going to be able to cover today. But for this session, when we talk about CalAIM, we're talking about two core programs. The first is Enhanced Care Management, or ECM, and the second is Community Supports. So ECM is a statewide medical benefit. It provides comprehensive care management services to certain populations of focus, including people experiencing or at risk of homelessness, and people with serious mental illness and or substance use disorders. And then with community supports, they're flexible non-medical services designed to address the social drivers of health.
Let's just fix the thing.
Okay.
Sure, it's electronic interference from two laptops and systems and whatnot. I mean, there's
Okay.
nothing we can really do about it, so we'll just grab this one.
Okay.
Very much help.
One more time. Testing. Great, okay. Okay, so the key distinction between these two core programs is that all managed care plans have to offer ECM, but community supports are optional. So plans can really choose whether or not to provide them. There are 15 community supports now if we include transitional rent, 7 of which focus on housing for people who are homeless or at risk for homelessness. Those are all listed here. For the purposes of PSH, the key ones are the housing trio, which are 1, 2, and 3, and transitional rent. So transitional rent basically provides 6 months of temporary rent payments while folks are stabilizing and can get connected to longer-term housing. So why does CalAIM matter for housing providers? Why does this sort of alphabet soup really matter for us here? CalAIM creates a new way for housing providers to access healthcare dollars to pay for supportive services. So in PSH, we know that the S stands for supportive services, and that's what keeps people housed. Many providers are already doing the work of ECM and community supports. They're helping with barriers, with benefits, leases, health check-ins. But the problem is that traditional housing funds rarely cover enough services, basically. And so CalAIM dollars can kind of fill that gap, helping providers is a proven bundle that helps people get housing and stay housed. It's now available in every county in California with over 75,000 people served in just 1 year. Providers are saying that CalAIM helps them deliver more comprehensive care and serve more people. We also know that housing supports improve health and save money. Housing deposits cut costs by 32%. HTSS, which is Housing Tenancy and Sustaining Services, are expected to be cost effective in the long term. And people who got at least one of the housing supports, the housing trio, use the ER in the hospital less in the following 6 months after receipt of that service. So this is really promising and important. And at Turner Center, we convened a CalAIM community of practice for a year where we brought together several affordable housing developers to sort of talk about both the challenges and the lessons learned with CalAIM implementation. And in our interviews with folks as part of that community of practice, we learned that CalAIM really improves resident engagement by kind of requiring these regular and very intentional check-ins with residents, and really helped staff build trust and respond early, kind of similar to the assertive model that Sharon was talking about earlier. So as one case manager put it, just seeing the value of more one-on-one time with residents, we need a little bit more support. The opportunity CalAIM provides to prioritize them. With the CalAIM program, it has helped us pivot towards those residents who are more at risk of being unstable in community housing. We're also seeing that managed care plans are noticing kind of the long-term benefits of implementing ECM and community support. So one managed care plan representative told me, initially some of the return on investment data was not promising, but to me that wasn't surprising. This is a very long game. Housing someone today is not going to mean that they don't get hospitalized tomorrow, but we are seeing that at month 12, 18, there has been a decrease in costs. It looks to be trending downward in things like emergency department encounters and in our inpatient admissions, both of which are good. So essentially, CalAIM is helping stabilize residents. We also heard that it's helping clarify staff roles, and it's also improving kind of accountability between partner agencies. A 2024 survey of nearly 1,000 CalAIM implementers, including 150 folks from the Central Valley, shows kind of mixed results. The positives were that most were saying that CalAIM is improving outcomes for people served, including people experiencing homelessness, but there were many challenges. CalAIM processes and workflows were not always perceived as being very effective. Providers struggled with kind of the unclear and inconsistent requirements from managed care plans. And as you all know, the workforce is already stretched thin. And on top of that, managed care plan rates don't always fully cover the cost of services. But many providers plan to expand services, so scale may help that funding work. And just looking ahead, with transitional rent, managed care plans can start offering that this year, but it becomes mandatory January 1st of 2026 for people with serious mental health and or behavioral health needs. In terms of the federal context, CMS is being a lot more cautious with the housing and social waivers. So states must prove that housing-related services improve health and save money, and DHCS is already working on that and showing that. But there is a little bit of uncertainty there. As I mentioned before, the CalAIM waivers expire at the end of next year, but DHCS released a concept paper in July of this year, which really outlines their vision and goals for the next 5 years. And they were clear that while they are not expanding programs under CalAIM, they do want to sustain the current CalAIM programs and keep the kind of momentum going with CalAIM. So I think the good news is that ECM and 12 of the 15 community supports, which includes the housing trio, don't need CMS approval to continue. They're kind of protected under a federal authority according to DHCS. So I think the takeaway is no changes are expected to ECM and the housing trio because DHCS is really committed to keeping them, walk through 4 Calian models of implementation. I'm going to pass it to Swamini.
I'm going to project my voice. I'm used to doing that, so let me try that. Thank you, Tessa, for the great background. So let me pause for some questions. You all You're probably going to see me shiver to the mic. Questions that are coming up, yes.
What's transitional rent?
Transitional rent is a new community support that is going to be active beginning 2026, which provides for up to 6 months of rent support as a community support to community members or residents who need the support moving from homelessness to interim housing to permanent housing. So it's going to provide that additional layer of funding for property owners and service providers to help the residents. I do want to clarify, housing deposit used to provide for first and last month's rent as a support, that is now taken out because transitional rent is being introduced. Obviously that causes some concerns because you're taking out the resource and now you need a lot more eligibility criteria to be met for transitional rent. So that's we're going to start to feel the impact of that beginning next year. So when many of the providers are looking at what other resources and rental funds can be accessed for residents who don't need or don't qualify for transitional rent, yet they need the first and last month's rent. Thank you, great question. Yes?
Is that 6 months consecutive, or can they use it sporadically as needed?
I believe it's consecutive. Eric or anybody else, if you all have any more information on that.
Maybe I can take it.
Yeah, I
And
believe.
is that a one-time service? One-time receipt?
I believe
Yes,
that's
it's once
we have,
in a lifetime with the rest of it.
yes.
Can I use they are behind on their rent?
That is the idea behind support because residents or community members coming out of homelessness do not have the financial resources. So how do we support them? Many of them may be owing back old rent. They might also qualify for transitional rent. Again, it's something that's coming up new, and a lot of providers are, including me, are trying to figure out what it looks like. And it's when people get accepted and approved for the service.
So it's not the right risk. So think of it as going to be applicable and available moving into a new unit. It's not going to be able to pay back rental service.
Correct.
And that was part of the discussion that we had with DHC. I think we did want to include the at risk. Was so we didn't open up to a larger population, but DHC is opportunity not.
Thank you for that information. Okay, any questions? Yes. Any other questions on ECM or community support before I go into models? Okay. The basic premise of Cal-AIM is Medi-Cal eligibility. Let's just round ourselves in that. Your residents have to have Medi-Cal as a source of coverage for their healthcare and now social needs in order to access the benefits. So BHCS reports about half of those Medi-Cal populations are presenting with the highest healthcare costs. 5% of those are the ones who are the most at risk. What does at-risk population look like in affordable housing? They're behind on rent. They have many lease violations. They have eviction notices. They have behavior issues, neighbor complaints, complaints about destruction of property, cluttering, hoarding. These are the residents who show up for you as you are working in your affordable housing or permanent supportive housing sites. I'm going to talk about the direct contract model, the one that we have working in a few counties in the Northern California side, San Mateo, Monterey, and San Francisco County. This model talks about the community-based organization directly contracting with the managed care plan. So you as a services provider have a direct covered entity contract with the managed care plan to be credentialed as a community supports provider to deliver the housing treatment. It is important to understand that doing this model gets you directly in contact with your managed care plan, therefore there's a lot of direct communication, but it also means that your infrastructure needs to be set up in order to do documentation, managing of claims and billing, and HIPAA compliant software and security and privacy systems. If you are a managed care plan also sees this as a cost-effective measure. So the more they invest in social drivers of health, the less they're going to see the healthcare costs rise. So that is one of the incentives by both the providers who want to work directly. The challenges is obviously a very steep learning curve and a very high administrative burden. You need to have your claim staff singled out, your services staff will need to do the documentation, your claims and billing staff will need to do authorizations and reauthorizations, and make sure that there is continuity of care. As you heard in the presentation before, the authorizations happen on a 6-month basis or a year basis. So you need to be on top of your reauthorization paperwork in order to maintain that support for funding for your resident to continue to access the services and supports. I want to also underscore that CalAIM is not just the housing trio. I always encourage all the service providers I work with, start referring from day one. If your resident does not have an ECM case manager assigned, make a referral. If your resident does not have a means provider, they have the needs that helps their medical conditions, make a referral to medically tailored needs. If they need home care assistance, personal care homemaker services, provide for services and support in addition to the in-home supportive services while you're waiting for in-home services and supports to kick in. So the referral provider network is really critical for CalAIM to function and to be successful. It cannot be just the housing providers and the services agencies. It has to be the network of providers that works together. So any questions on the direct care model? Okay. All right. Tessa's going to talk about a nonprofit hub model in January that she recently launched a case study on. So,
Yes, so the way that the nonprofit hub model works is that the nonprofit hub basically holds the Medi-Cal contract with the managed care plan. And then the hub manages all of the compliance, all of the billing and data systems that go along with the CalAIM programs, and then local community-based organizations and housing developers actually subcontract to provide the services. So in terms of advantages, it really centralizes all of those challenging processes around billing and compliance, which are really complex. It reduces the administrative burden for everyone, but particularly for smaller CBOs. It also ensures that rejected claims can be kind of corrected and then resubmitted, which really protects revenue. So that's really important. There are also challenges with this model. It really adds another layer, which can make decision-making slower. And success really depends heavily on the hub's capacity and their expertise. So I wanted to share a little bit about Jamboree Housing and Housing for Health California because they're a really good example of the nonprofit hub model. So Jamboree manages about 1,200 PSH units statewide. They're primarily based in Orange County. Unlike other providers who focus kind of solely on their residents, they chose to extend community supports and ECM to unhoused community members kind of beyond their own properties. So that's a little bit different from how PSH developers and operators really see themselves, but having staff kind of support community members outside of the property actually increases the scale in which people can be served, and that can increase the funding predictability from Medi-Cal reimbursement. So that's a really important distinction. Jamboree was an early adopter of Orange County's whole person care pilot, which was actually the precursor to CalAIM. And they, at that time, partnered with several CBOs. And along with those CBOs, they launched Housing for Health Orange County, which is now Housing for Health California. And that's the nonprofit hub. And so Housing for Health California basically manages, like I said, all of the contracting, all of the billing, the dispute resolutions with the managed care plans, really simplifying that process for Jamboree. Housing for Health California charges a 10% administration fee for their work. And they're also currently expanding to a lot of new areas right now, including Sacramento, Kern, Bakersfield, and they've partnered with several managed care plans, including Cal Optima in Orange County, but also Kaiser, HealthNet, and Anthem. And Jamboree also shared with us that about 20% of PSH services funding now actually comes from Medi-Cal. So that means that case management ratios improved from 1 to 40 to 1 to 20. It also allowed them to hire very specialized staff like clinicians, which is really important for the services and care that they're providing. Jamboree and Housing for Health California are also leading a really innovative pilot. So across 3 Jamboree sites, they're kind of evaluating whether more staffing leads to kind of improved outcomes in housing and health and employment. That's actually being evaluated by CSH. And if successful, Cal Optima, which is the managed care plan in Orange County, really aims to make HCSS a permanent Medi-Cal benefit. So that's really critical because it would ensure reliable revenue for Jamboree and other developers in Orange County. And I will pass it to Swami.
Any questions on the Jamboree model? Because what I'm going to talk about with the county led is very similar to the Jamboree model, but just want to check in and see what questions come up for you. This is very different administration of the Cali program because you're going to the service provider for their expertise, and then you're going to the administrative hub for the claims billing and other infrastructure that they can provide.
Did I read in is the Mid-Penn case study, is that a hub model too?
No, Mid-Penn is a direct contract model. So that's the one that I described in the first one. So they directly contract with 2 different health plans. And one of the things that I wanted to mention, and this is one of the best practices we've also seen, is throughout in the course of time we served Cali residents in the 3 counties, we also found that some of the residents during the time of recertification, residents were choosing Kaiser as the other available health plan. So we were losing continuity of care for those residents because the Kaiser model also meant that the service provider for housing tenancy was changing, and they did not have as heavy touch points as we would like for the residents where we have on-site services that we provide. So one of the strategic steps that we decided to do was, as a services provider, we are now also contracting with Kaiser, with their NLEs, the network lead entities, and that will be the 4th model that we're talking about. But that is how the direct contract works, where you will have to directly work with the managed care plan in order to provide the services. So going back to the nonprofit hub model, going back to the county-led model, this one specifically exists in Alameda County, Placer, Ventura, and Contra Costa County, and there's a California Healthcare Foundation paper as well that is linked here that describes the models. In my experience working with the Alameda County system, I feel this is a really good collaboration for services and supports that our county supported, and if the county really can take on that administrative bench for the various community providers who are experts in delivering the services. So in Alameda County, the Alameda County Health acts as the administrator or the convener for the services that are for the housing trio of services, and they work with the Alameda Alliance on Health as a health plan, their direct partner. So the way it works is community-based organizations who are equipped to deliver either of the housing trio, they will be working on the housing trio system, contract with the Alameda County Health. Alameda County Health contracts with Alameda Alliance, and they supervise and monitor services and supports for housing tenancy, housing deposits, and housing transition. The advantages of the model is obviously there is a strong alignment of systems. The county is able to streamline and work through the different provider systems and make that much more feasible for managed care plans to work with. They are able to also do that because they have the social health information exchange system in the county, and they really leverage the HMIS system as a data entry platform. They encourage the providers to enter their information and documentation that meet strict billable guidelines, which also increases the quality of support and the quality of documentation that the providers are giving for the residents. And they have recently updated the HMI system to include care planning tools. So the providers are directly making care plans into the HMI system. At a certain point in
one of you mentioned being in a regional center, there are so many different providers that are there. One piece I always find on this is we don't know what the other is doing unless we are sharing. I think this really helps to have the providers connect together and have a holistic care plan and not dilute the resources and time. Everybody wants to do everything for the resident, but everybody doesn't need to do everything for the resident. You just need the right people at the table and the right referrals. I really found this model to be a good jumping off point for new providers. If your county offers this resource and you are explorers, you would want to begin that conversation because it will help you do what you do, continue to do your service provision and documentation, while the billing and claims management pieces are handled by the county. Obviously, you're going to get a lot of technical assistance and staff training because the county has resources to provide that. So you will feel supported along the way to do that. So I'm a big fan of the county-led model, having experienced how that works and having worked with a direct system as well. Both have its benefits and challenges, but it's a really good system or model to work through if you are just newly starting out and your county is really offering that. Any questions on the model for the county-led that come up for you? Yes.
How does that work if the service provider provides services to multiple counties? So, like for example, our regional center has 5 counties that are in our catchment area.
Correct.
So, would there be one central county that would lead for that for our particular service provider, or would that be contracted within each county?
So your county needs to be the administrator on record with your health plan for that county first. So they need to be performing that role to be the CALIM administrator for those services. And each of your centers, if you're interested in being the community supports provider, will have a contract with the county. So it is county specific and resource specific as well. So because you will, even though you're contracted with the county, you still go through credentialing process with the county, you still need to submit an agency staffing plan, a training plan, just so that the county is aware that you can deliver the services and have staff capacity. But it definitely is a contract model you need to engage. And the county has to have that active in order to use it.
Just to piggyback what you're doing, I think for your agency, if you're serving multiple counties, I think it makes more sense to work with managed care directly and contract no different counties you want to provide service with, because it's going to be very specific to that county, and that county has to take on that role. So not all counties are structured that way, right? So most of the Central Valley counties aren't structured that way.
I will say, on the housing side, we've seen a push from the state that the counties are much more involved in housing, right? Like the county is the applicant on a home key project, right? Or on a no place like home project. So we're being encouraged to walk hand in hand with our counties. So I'm interested in this model because I feel like we're kind of doing it anyway. Like, so I'm just interested because I feel like there's already got to be a strong alignment with your county just based on some of the funding that exists from HCD right now.
Correct, right. And different counties operate differently. So the counties in Monterey and Santa Cruz have their own provider network who are CM and CS providers, but they are not the county-led hub model because they are individually contracted with the managed care plan. But I agree, it's a direct contract model if their county is not set up to do that function. And the CHCF, the California Healthcare Foundation paper we linked, they have reviewed the 4 counties who have these models active today. So if you're in those counties, you would apply for that, I would say. And it's
So that's even if you, as a service provider, provide services in 5 different counties, then it would be like, we
So
would
you
go to the
could-
county and find out for that particular county where the service providers
correct.
are.
Like for example, NIPED currently is in San Mateo, Santa Cruz, and Monterey County. If NIPED decides to go in Alameda County, NIPED will work with the county model because that's the model set. NIPED can choose to go directly to the Alameda Alliance if that's still the efficient model to go through, and that will require that analysis. But that's the existing resource available. And the staff support that I find within the county trainings. The care plan, when they were launching, they did a lot of trainings for the community-based providers to do that. And there is a sense of meeting the providers and the residents where they are at. So when we talk about the housing support plans, there needs to be context built in to understand reauthorization. Managed care plans don't always understand that if you haven't provided enough documentation. So the county will come back to you and say, we didn't quite get why this resident needs to continue the services. Can you give us more context? So there's always a collaborative engagement that happens, and versus like, no, we don't get it, denied. So it's really a collaborative. And the last model that I'm talking about and I referenced earlier is the Kaiser model. They work through what they call as network lead entities. And this is one of the most recent contracts that I've worked with, where consider the network lead entities as your hub while you're working with the managed care plan like Kaiser. So there are specific network lead entities who have been designated by Kaiser for specific counties and specific populations of focus. So independent living systems is specifically the one network lead entity that works with populations coming in from homelessness, having prior history, chronic health conditions, and such. There is Full Circle, I believe, in Southern California that works with children and youth population of focus. So if you are a provider of those services, you would contract with the network lead entity, and the network lead entity then manages and sends information back to Kaiser. So there is no direct contact with Kaiser. Yes?
Will these sites be available, or are they on your resource systems that you shared at the beginning?
So I'm sure the slides will be made available. You can, and then there's also a QR code with our emails. You can email us, and we can also send you the information. But we try to link most of the things in the resources, because there's a lot out there, and I would highly recommend, if you are really interested in reviewing the information, especially the explorers in the room and the connectors that we talked about are working on partnering. California Healthcare Foundation has an amazing set of research out there. Turner Center is doing a lot of case studies. These would be very good references to go to.
Yeah, the slides are currently not linked to the resource guide, but I will do that. And I wonder if there's a way to also circulate all the slides from today to everyone.
Yeah, we can put all the slides in the Hula app, so download that if you haven't, and that's where we'll communicate them all.
Yes.
You might have already said this, but which audience is Fresno County now?
So, and that's the next panel that's coming up. I know Tulare County is what we're going to discuss next. There is, I had done the research on Tucson County. I don't have much details on the
Fresno,
specific.
you're going to have a combination of both. Because in Fresno, you have Kaiser, which utilizes the hub model. You have Anthem Blue Cross, and you have Calviva. Now, with Anthem, we have extended our contract with California for Health to include Central Valley counties. So you can opt out of contract directly with us, or you can contract out directly with them, and go through that subcontracting process with them. Right? And of course, there is that, that the fact that they are taking 10% of the fee that you're earning to cover the administrative fees. But that, you don't have to deal with the reimbursement issues and the setup to be able to have an operation because the cost is when it comes to reimbursement money. So.
Would you say most, Miguel, are doing direct in the valley?
Yeah, so even California Health has been pretty decent. We still don't have any they don't have any subcontracted providers in Central Valley County. So it's going to be a direct subcontract model. If we look at membership or role in Fresno County,
common questions that we get all the time, and we're gonna do it kind of by group. And then once she has a chance to answer those questions, we'll field questions from folks by group. So we're gonna start with the explorers, because that's, I think, most of you. So we'll spend the most time kind of answering questions from the explorers, but we'll make our way through all 4 groups. So for the explorers, when we at the Turner Center facilitated that Calian Community of Practice, we noticed that there were both kind of veterans and newcomers to the space. And one of the most common questions that we got from folks that were new to Calian was, is Calian something my organization needs to get involved in, right? And so I'm wondering, Samini, what your answer would be to that, and given what we kind of know about the waiver and it expiring next year, but also knowing that DHCS has committed to continuing ECM and the housing trio, like what advice would you give to an organization that approached you today? Why Calian and why now?
Absolutely, and if there are other questions for the explorers that you want to bring up, happy to answer those too. So I get this question often from affordable housing providers. I've helped 4 of them now in all the 4 counties that I mentioned about, launch their CalAIM operations and programs. It all started with, should we do the CalAIM program? And almost all of them had an established services provider program for the residents. What I would say for those trying to get into supporting your residents, most of you here are trying to explore permanent supportive housing. You have an expectation of delivering wraparound services. CalAIM is a wraparound service model. If you know how to connect into the spokes, if you know how to access the provider network. So know your population that you're serving. If you are a permanent supportive housing provider, are you seeing a lot of lease violations, rent issues, behavior issues, trying to work with the residents but they are not engaging with you in services? What resource could help you more? Perhaps you could be working with an enhanced case manager or provider that can be connected with the resident, and both of you together can work with the resident. So know your population, know what your needs are, and if any of those housing supports are an answer to those needs, remember that you are already doing the work. You are going to get funding for it. You need to do more documentation and be more aligned with care planning and conversations for that. So how do you build up your expertise for that? I will highly encourage any of the explorers or even any of the other groups interested in CalAIM to join your local PAC collaboratives. How many of you have heard of a PAC collaborative? Central Valley PAC collaborative? Okay, you guys definitely have to.
They would be there.
Exactly, I understand that. And Transform Health is the agency that is designated by DHCS to be the facilitator as a collaborative resource for the Central Valley. And that resource has been linked in the document that we have given you guys code for. Joining this is the group where you will find like-minded providers, service providers, developers, owners come to the table and say, we want to do this, how do we get started? You will have your managed care plan at the table, you'll have the other referral partners at the table. Central Valley PAC Collaborative is a resource I highly recommend people to engage in, and they definitely have a lot of resources and supports, they meet regularly, so I would definitely encourage you all to do that. There is also PAC technical assistance dollars available for launching new providers into the CalAIM space. I will put a caution, those dollars are drying up. So if you have never applied for a PAC technical assistance grant, now is the time to do that. As a new provider, you are eligible to submit for technical assistance needs to launch your CalAIM program, and if you can do that in the year 2026, your application needs to go in 2025 in order for it to be approved, and you will receive the funding and support. And obviously the technical assistance team also has vendors that you can work with directly who can help you with the program. So definitely a shout out to my collaborators over there. Any other questions from the explorers? Whether you should, if you're wondering today, since you're not in the collaboratives, what are you wondering today? If you should do CalAIM or really critical for supporting the resident. The scattered site model works when there's resources obviously not available. But if you have an on-site services program, housing, tenancy, and sustaining services definitely is an easy one to get into. Obviously, gets me up.
Specifically for our housing providers, and it varies in different counties, right, because there's different needs and gaps right now. But I will say that for managed care plans, housing continues to be a focus. Housing navigation services is one of the most utilized community supports throughout the state. And when we're looking at our network of providers, we're really looking to bring on providers who are already doing that work, right? So the last thing we want is, clinical healthcare providers that have no idea what it is to run a current support housing provider. So, I think if you're interested, reach out to your managed care plans. I'm happy to have a conversation with any of you if you are interested in kind of exploring that. If you're not certainly an anti-contracted county identification, you have somebody, somebody from the managed care will who can help you. But we'll continue to advocate specifically like housers to look into it if you're interested. I wouldn't say this in other settings, right? But I think housing continues to be a priority, and we want to continue being on providers that have that expertise and are already doing that work.
And I would say managed care plans have come a long way. They have CAL-AIM service teams available with expertise to provide and give the support to the providers who are coming on new, claim support, services, documentation, care planning. So definitely engage if you understand. I know, I just wanted to have a time check depending on how much. Okay. So why don't we open it up?
Completely open it up.
Yeah, we open it up for any other lingering questions that you all have and what shows up for you when you think about permanent supportive housing, when you think about CAL-AIM, community supports. Yes.
I have one, probably longer than this will be, but wondering as somebody who works for developer and is trying to monitor like fidelity and service quality, and I think when our projects were in conception and built out, designed for a primary provider on site to be delivering services, and with the introduction of the CAL-AIM with so many direct contacts available, and I took a note of like, I think it said 151 providers in the valley.
In the report that came out by Goodwin Simon, it was 150 implementers took the survey.
Gotcha.
They're probably, part of the group that's already doing service.
So even if it was like half of that, I think as the owner representatives who are monitoring those things, it presents a new challenge of service coordination for us in that our projects weren't necessarily designed with us to have a continued heavy presence within the development once it goes into operations and is being supported by a primary provider. And part of the challenge is, I think for us, the reason PSH can work so well is that you have so much close contact with your on-site provider and you can navigate individual situations with more clarity about what that tenant is experiencing, whereas now we are trying to wrangle 30 providers because the client gets, of course, the choice of who they choose to stay. And they may have had an ECM or housing support before. They don't want to leave that when they come into a new project or new permanent support housing. And so any recommendations on wrangling? It is a little bit of a challenge just in terms of like ensuring that tenants are getting access to consistent offering between one provider and the next.
I'll make it a little easier for you.
Yes.
If you can work with your assigned provider that you're contracted with to provide services on site, check with them if they want to be a community supports provider.
And sometimes usually they are. But the challenge is they are one, and we rely on them because they're physically on site every day, and we can work management can work alongside them about individual cases. But if we have many tenants in the property who have already gotten in with an ECM prior, maybe when they were still unhoused, or have opted to change ECMs to a different emphasis, we then, as the management team, don't have the capacity necessarily to be in contact with every single one of those individual organizations when we're troubleshooting keeping folks housed. So I don't think there's probably an answer to that question, but It is definitely a challenge that we're finding. It's a substantially bigger workload for the housing providers themselves because it has diffused out the services to other places.
Right. I do find that housing tenancy sustaining providers and an ECM provider are like the hub of the service. If you find either of this resource, they can do the referrals and connect with the other providers. I understand even the service providers will have capacity, they can only serve 20. Is there another provider network in your county that you're working with who is a housing tenancy provider? You can make a referral to that provider to take on if they have capacity. Managed care plans are also required to assign an ECM case manager, so maybe that's a referral resource that the ECM providers are already receiving, and they are on the list of their outreach, and it depends on whether they can get in contact with the resident or not. So the two hubs, I would say, is the community supports provider with housing tenancy and an ECM manager that they're assigning. But I hear you, there are so many providers, so many residents, actually, and the providers have reducing capacity because they could.
And I do think it presents a, maybe if I'm not mistaken, a like unique billing challenge also for the on-site provider. Like if they are ECM and housing support, and we're as the owner who's got an agreement with them to be there, like we're asking them to confirm or coordinate care with another ECM, like they can't bill for that. And if that's their primary support of funding, we can't expect that they will deliver that service for a tenant who's not enrolled with them. So that's like the loop that we've gotten kind of stuck in a little bit.
Well, let's introduce a provider. Good segue. Eric and Liz and Miguel, why don't you guys come on up? Thank you. Tessa, don't leave. I think there's going to be some more questions. So now I'm going to bring up my colleagues from Tulare County. Self-Help is in the room, my organization. We are in the middle of a new provider rollout for PSH in Tulare County. So I asked them to come tell us how successful we're all going to be and how we're figuring it out, because it's been really interesting. It's been a really big learning process for me to kind of watch how we're doing all of this. Are your slides on there? Yeah. I'll let you pull those up. Rather just introduce me to my thoughts, but I'll read mine. Okay, hang in there, guys. I would give you a break, but we're almost out of time. So feel free to grab a drink and grab a snack. But this is our last section, and then we get to go to the cocktail reception. So this is Liz Mason. Liz was born and raised here in the Valley. I didn't notice Liz. Originally drawn from when she was working at Evangel Home, which is an organization I know. She was drawn from working in youth residential studies, social work, done clinical work with adults living with complex mental health conditions. And now she's in Tulare County, and her focus is the clinical network development for the county's health branch. So we do work very closely together. We also have Dr. Eric Rosen, who is from Kingsview. Kingsview Behavioral Health Center?
Just Kingsview.
Okay, just Kingsview. Dr. Eric Rosen has extensive experience designing and developing robust behavioral health and housing environment programs. So, like we're talking about here, like actually making the program into what's realistic, right? So that's where we are right now. And then, of course, we have Miguel, who you've been hearing from a little bit in all of the panels. Miguel, I've worked with in a variety of settings, and currently he is with Anthem. He serves Fresno, Madera, Kings
So I kind of have this slide up here. I didn't develop this chart, but when you're talking to someone from behavioral health, we're thinking, oh, somebody needs housing or support. Do they need to be in the hospital short term? Do they need to be in a locked setting where there's 24-hour surveillance and treatment, intensive treatment? Or do they need something else? And so for us, permanent supportive housing is an element that we're hoping to help people get to as they're recovering. And it's kind of like this great success story when it does happen. But we really are trying to expand our understanding of our role in the permanent supportive housing space and what that looks like. And yes, treatment is definitely an element and something that we're very much, mandated to do and we want to do. We talk about mandates a lot, so like, okay, what is it we actually have to do? There's a lot of things that we do want to do, like we have to always recalibrate to what is it we have to do to make sure we're hitting those targets as best we can, and then what else can we add on? But I just kind of shared this as like, here's a whole spectrum of things that are on our radar as behavioral health, and that we're finding ways to help fund or get people connected to, in addition to kind of the wider community needs for permanent supportive housing, since folks who are living in those settings may or may not be connected into behavioral health. So a little bit of wordiness here, just to say that really our focus has been trying to serve some of the folks who are probably most vulnerable and maybe struggling with some really intense chronic conditions from the behavioral health side of things. That could be mental health, it could be an addiction issue, a combo of all of that, along with social issues. And so that's a lot of times when we're focused on trying to treat somebody, we're thinking sometimes about like the hardest, most difficult chronic folks that we're trying to serve and help. And as we've been talking about today, there's like constantly changing priorities that come at us from the federal level, state level, local levels when we're talking about for Meade County, like what's important to our board of supervisors in our different jurisdictions and cities, which some of you may be here too. There's a lot of different priorities we have to try to listen to and digest and juggle, really to try to serve our community. And really what that comes down to, when we distill it down, I think all of us are probably here, I know I am too, is because we care about the person, we care about the community. And so this is always the question, like even with all of that, all the jargon we've talked about, all the complicated systems, it boils down to how do we best serve the person in front of us, or the person that's walking through our doors, or who's living at the housing site. And it's a complicated answer. I found this image, and it's very blank, and it's something we've already been talking about. But if you, right now, think of an actual person you know, or maybe even yourself, and put yourself in the middle little bubble there, and then think about the different people that either you or that person you're thinking about are connected to. You could probably come close to filling all of those little bubbles up with different people that have come and gone in your life, or maybe you're currently there, or maybe for the person that you're thinking of that you've served, or a loved one. There's lots of different systems, partners, folks that are involved in our lives, the whole web that we've been referring to. And sometimes, like this image kind of shows, there's some of those things are connected together, and some of them are not, but they're connected to that person in the middle. And I think the big question that we've been kind of rolling around today is, how do we find out about all the connections? It's hard, very, very hard. So I'll ask that right now. What have you, and we've kind of talked about some ideas, but what have you found does work to try to find about all the connections of a person's life? What are some successes there? Yeah.
Ask them.
That's a great answer. Yeah. Any other things? But yeah, that's like the number one perfect answer. There's other ways, but yeah, ask them. And sometimes I think others mentioned, I know we saw the analogy of the burrito, which I love. There's definitely there's layers to all of our lives. Or if any of you guys have watched Shrek, sometimes we're layered with but there's always layers, and you can ask a person about them. And sometimes that is an ongoing ask, where as the layers start to peel, or we're like digging in a little deeper, more resources, more connections come to light. So it kind of happens over a process, but yes, definitely asking them. So I think what we're hoping for, another image, I just found this on the internet. I'm not going to take credit for it. But I think what we're hoping to move more towards is this, I just liked these images and thought they would be nice illustrations about, there's the webs and there's this goal of interconnection. And so, to talk a little bit about the systems, which again, some of this has been mentioned. In my work here in behavioral health, we've found there's lots of different parties at the table just for the housing, and I probably have left some off. But when we talk about coordinating systems, there's the developers that we work with, and some of you are here, who are building housing. And for us in Tulare County, behavioral health, we have a strong relationship with our housing authority, as do other developers. And so that's a really important partnership for us, as well as partnering with the Great Lakes Holdings, at South Health, and others. But there's lots of organizations helping do the work. And they're a huge part of the work, because behavioral health, we haven't traditionally been in the building housing business. So that's not our area of expertise, but we can connect with people who are more expert in that. As we've talked to, there's usually on-site property managers at each of these sites that are in the thick of it, have a really specific focus, and they're very connected to what's happening in the culture of their housing site, and they hold a piece of the puzzle. And then, as was mentioned before, there's various service providers who are in the mix, from county behavioral health or other county departments. And we have the NCPs and their network of care, which could include primary care. We talked a little bit about county services, CS, ECM. Sometimes those are all the same people, but not all the time, as was mentioned before. And we have a lot of other community-based organizations and nonprofits who help come along and try to wrap around the folks that we're serving. So there's tons usually of people trying to help them out. And then something that I'm a lot more connected with these days is more of that administrative oversight piece. I'm not as much getting my feet dirty in the weeds and out there in the housing sites doing the work, but there's all these layers of administrative oversight that we have to kind of keep in mind and juggle. It's not necessarily the fun part of the job for me, even though that's kind of what I do, but it's an important part of the job. And that oversight, like I mentioned before, it can include different county departments and our board of supervisors. It can include our city jurisdictions and the priorities they might have too around building out facilities and housing developments. Of course, a lot of our projects have different layers of funding, like we've kind of talked about, and each of those layers of funding has different accountability and reporting requirements. And some of that's insurance-led, so really with county behavioral health, a lot of our work is insurance-type work. That's why Miguel, thank you for being here. I hold a lot of expertise in that arena. But we also have the continuum of care, the COC, which I think most counties or regions have that, and that's actually like this kind of unifying structure or organization that helps kind of gather, to the best of our abilities, the different people who have a voice and have a stake in trying to help folks get housed, to try to address housing and security in our areas. And this kind of like usually involves a mix of the different people I've just talked to, as well as just the community at large. And that voice is so important to the work we do too, to help inform what we're doing, to hear what people think is working, what people don't think are working. And so we have like hopefully open communication with the community about the myths and the truths about this kind of work, because there's all sorts of thoughts and images out there. But it's really complex work that involves our whole community at different levels. And so to drill down a little bit into some of that information, I'm going to speak a little bit to how we apply these things locally in Tulare County. So one thing that is a more recent change in the last few months is our homelessness services continuum of care, the COC. We have a homelessness services initiative program coordinator, Noah Whitaker. Some of you have probably met him or know him. And he's been a huge part of our county-wide initiative to help address homelessness issues and bring people together. And he's been in our agency for a while in a variety of roles. In the last few months, as we've evaluated state initiatives and the needs that are going on, we've kind of reorged a little bit and brought he and his team and these programs under the umbrella of behavioral health. And a lot of that is because we're receiving the message loud and clear, especially from state exchanging our ideas and trying to decode each other's language, so we're talking about the same things. But it's a recent shift, and I think that's going to be really helpful for us going into the future, because we talk about there's lots of things always changing, and we think this will be a nice new way to approach our work in a lot more unified way. And I want to share a little bit too for a moment about a specialized team that Tulare County developed too, CCT. I want to say it's the community. Man, that might be slightly wrong, but it's something like that. But this is a team that we actually developed kind of during the pandemic. Any of you guys get involved with Project Room Key at all? Yeah, right. Yeah, me too. Me too. We all had to like do a bunch of new things really quickly when the pandemic hit. One of the things that I think most counties have is some type of Project Room Key experience. And as we kind of went through that and moved into Home Key and some of the other iterations of housing, we developed, based on like what we were seeing and experiencing, kind of this MDT team of county folks, so county staff and employees that all like Noah, that are kind of more programmatic, but also like very passionate about serving the community. And we included folks like from like what I call it Tulare, which is self-sufficiency counselors who have direct access into the system to get people enrolled in benefits. Yeah.
Can you elaborate on how the homeless services team works with the service providers and what that relationship looks like?
Yeah.
From an administrative level.
Yeah, absolutely. So the homeless services team has a relationship with some of the other network partners, and that this team, as a county, we've been doing some of the work for a few years, like very directly and hands-on, to do outreach to folks, like literally at encampments, at housing sites, where we get calls to go and try to respond. And that work it's been really good, and as we've come across the need to really scale up our reach, we know that we can't do it just as a county with our own internal staff. And so we've formed lots of contracts, lots of partnerships, formal and informal, with all the different parties that we're aware of, and we, as we become aware of more, where we're trying to plan and strategize together about like, hey, who's doing what, who's lead on this. And really the way that happens is some formal meetings where we do come together and hash things out and create objectives or like compare workflows. But there's also the meetings after the meetings, or there's lunches, or there's late night texts or emails saying, hey, this came up and how can we best address this? But we've taken a really hands-on approach as county folks, and now as we're having to scale up to do more, we're starting to really lean into and rely more on our community partners. So like Eric's here representing Kingsview. They're one of our huge partners in the county. We have many others. But we've developed contracts that we're working with. And our homelessness initiatives team is still doing some of the work hands-on and starting to transition back a little bit from the hands-on work and moving more into like the provider network and development and keeping all the pieces together. Really, the more that we have to expand, the county is becoming more of this connector of all the parties, while we also have some resources that we have. It's not just us completely saying, oh, okay, we're here to like keep tabs on things, but we have some financial resources. We, in some capacity, have some staff resources. So it's a mix of like doing some of that direct stuff and offering some funding and services, but also helping to connect those dots. Like in that ideal web, we're not there yet, but we are now becoming more and more of that connector and as a partner in these kind of works. And that's kind of where this multidisciplinary team is heading. We're trying to make connections to ensure that all of the needs people have are being met by the folks who are truly experts in some of the work in the areas that we're not expert in. There's certain things that it's always going to be us, like getting a lot of fun phone calls in the middle of the night about stuff that was happening. So like, we're still in that work zone and sort of transitioning now into working with partners. I mentioned, there's been mention of BHSA and MHSA, and this is how we fund some of our programs, is through that funding as behavioral health. All county behavioral health receive this funding from the state, as was mentioned. And there's specific buckets that give us rules or about how we can spend that money and how much. And so we've been using, you see those buckets, a couple of them there, that's a lingo for BHSA and HSA on how we assign money to programs. But now with BHSA coming online next July, it's changing to something called housing interventions, which is kind of a new definition of how we fund housing supports. So we're kind of in flux and trying to figure out, like, of our programs we have now, what fits into, what's going to fit into the new model, and how can we, again, make sure all of it, most of it is covered where we can. We rely a lot on insurance and billing, which is why that's on there. And that's really the bread and butter of how we sustain a ton of our programs, just in general, but also when it comes to supportive services. And so we really operate kind of like this mini arm of the insurance plan alongside the NCPs to bill for and provide special medical services, and DMC is drug med-cal, so services for recovery from alcohol and drug or substance use disorders. So that's a huge piece of what we do, like knowing the ins and outs of who qualifies and how to get people access there, and how to get insurance reimbursement, federal match dollars to sustain programs is a big deal. And of course now there's ECMNCS, which is available in the community and kind of helps infuse things. One of the things that we're working through right now, along with McKinnell and our MSP partners and Eric and his team, is how to identify, like, who's eligible for what and when, so we're not duplicating work, and then, like, when should our behavioral health services money kick in. So it's this kind of complicated conversation. Accounting services will pay for some things, and then when those things maybe time out or a person doesn't need those anymore, maybe that's when we can come in and provide some things. But there's also pieces of it where we're doing things together in tandem. So there's not like a one-size-fit-all kind of answer to this, but there's a lot of layering and a lot of communication that happens. And then I meant grants. We all, I think, live off of a few different types of grants and funding that, again, help sustain our programs. And grants are, they're time limited, so we do our best with that and work on, like, what's the next plan. So that's something that we're constantly doing organizationally, and then working with all of our partners here. So you just want to add to any of that? I'm just talking. Like, here's where we can talk a little more about a few of our housing sites. And again, this isn't all of them, but I thought it would be good to talk about some of our no-placement home sites or permanent supportive housing. And they have some carve-out units, especially for folks that are in our mental health system or connected to it, and then home key sites, home key plus. And so that's a nice little map that shows kind of where some of these are spread out throughout Tulare County. Just thought that would be nice to see that visual. In case you don't know what these are, just some few high-level points. These are apartment complexes or rehab hotels in some cases. Typically the county doesn't own them, but they're managed by our partners. They may have like a mix of funding streams, like getting people housed there, and No Place Like Home is just one of the funding streams. And so, as you can see, the folks who are eligible for that do have to have some type of connection with our behavioral health system. Whether they're already involved with this in some form or fashion, or people have identified, hey, we think there's a need there, and we're gonna like figure it out, try to get them in there. But we do have several units kind of scattered throughout the county, 115. And this kind of, if you're familiar with our county, gives you the cities where they are too. And I'll say, so you see that number, a total of 115. Those are the ones that are, again, just more specific for folks that we know for sure have some type of behavioral health thing going on. These apartment complexes typically have a lot more housings or units there. This is just a small fraction. And that does matter to say, like, on one hand, as a county, we want to make sure we're serving the folks So just to kind of give you some visuals to go with that landscape. How people get into these programs, I mean, there has to be a referral, that means eligibility. A lot of this is through the coordinated entry system. And for us, we have the Kings Tillery Homeless Alliance that's very connected with that. And United Way is another partner that helps us with running that system. But we also have to have like that behavioral health vetting at some point that yes, a person does probably have this going on. So at some level of behavioral health person will get involved, whether it's like one of our existing providers, we have multiple clinics and programs throughout the county, or getting that person to talk with a clinician at least once to see like, find out what we can about a person's life. That can be tricky to get enough information and then an initial meeting to say like, yes, this person qualifies. So I know there was a lot of talk earlier about how we maybe sell the services. That is like so key, especially in these like first meetings, to like really be engaging and try to have a person share enough about their life to say like, okay, you're in the right spot. We got enough for now. Some people will be an open book and just tell you everything, but not everybody. Sometimes you gotta fish a little bit and really do what you can to earn that trust, so you can help them get them to the next step, and eventually you can probably learn more.
I will also say, I think when you're looking at getting engagement from PSH community members, you should look at that continuity of care, right? Because they're typically already working with the housing navigator, right? So there's some sort of trust relationship that has already been built. And so hopefully there's some sort of warm handoff from that particular provider to this new provider, right? So really do leverage that relationship from that housing navigator and try to build upon that.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's so true. Like, and real, like, very practically what that can look like is you have a person, and just as simple as like, hey, do you have your insurance card? Do you know what your insurance plan is? And finding out like who, if they don't know who their navigator is, sometimes the person might not. Or they'll be like, oh, this person helps me. I have a social worker. Okay, let's find out who that is. You might have to like just, go explore, be curious, find out what their plan is, and maybe help them make some phone calls to figure out the person's.
On the third item,
Yeah.
what constitutes a complete referral package?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. How did you ask that?
It depends on the service activity. So when you're making a referral for enhanced care management, maybe supports, your bare minimums are going to be name, insurance card information, date of birth, something to verify eligibility, and start getting information out of the insurance carrier. For county behavioral health, it may just be as simple as a name and a social security number, maybe just a name. Clinical information, it's always as much as you can. It's the more that you have initially, the more likely your referral or authorization to be approved in a timely manner. But if you've got identifying information, the person you're sending it to in this county plan will likely have more than you know.
Okay, so it's very low barrier in that regard. The referral packets are not super, you don't have to collect a lot of information that you may not necessarily have like access to.
It depends. It really depends on the type of service. So for certain services that require prior authorization, like some enhanced care management or community supports benefits, they will require some evidence that they genuinely need the service to approve an authorization, some kind of health condition, evidence or indication that they're housed. For specialty health services, that's an indication they've got some kind of health disorder, diagnosis, treatment history, something. So it's largely contingent on the service that you want to make the referral for and how much you want to go back and forth.
Well, and for the housing side of the referral, it's a lot more, and it's site specific.
And that's the thing that most like.
It's not very low barrier.
I was surprised. I was like, name of a social security number. That's all right.
For services, that who maybe has been very chronically homeless and just has, not wanted to participate as dodged us for various reasons of their own, and they might be brand new to us, and so we really are trying to like get enough to know like, yes, this is what's going on. And I love what Miguel said, like sometimes there's some of those other people in their lives who have pieces of that information that we can get a hold of them, they have permission to get enough from them that will like piece the information together. The documents, that can be tricky. And I know I mentioned the CCT earlier. Well, actually, one of the biggest services that has been the most helpful is one of the team members is notarized and can really help expedite getting like birth certificates, identifying information. So anytime you can include that in your team, that's great, and that can help with that process. Because
For PSH, right, those referrals are coming to coordinating systems, right? So that COC should have some sort of process, and where they're already working through that document ready process with housing navigators as they're making that referral, right? So typically, you're going to have a member who's already going to be connected to a housing navigator who's going to have that support to get access to all those other documents that they need, right? Because, yeah, on our end, right, in order to process ECM or communities, housing sustainability, that's not very burdensome, but we understand that the burden's going to be in order to get them housing to that end, right? Because you're typically moving from either an interim housing setting, emergency housing setting, or just, out in the streets into a permanent housing setting. And so, like, I know that when a lot of these projects were opening up, the COC was helping facilitate and coordinating these meetings, and they were, going into these, the whole movement process and then working through that entire process, right? And a lot of that typically fell on the developer to make sure that that was happening, right? Because it was urgency to ensure that these units were being leased up, right? So one of the things I think in Tulare County that has worked really well is the coordination with the COC, the role of the COC really kind of helping and facilitating that. And then from our end, we did make an investment to have a tallying coordinator whose whole job was really working on integrating these new tallying services into our homeless response system, right? So ensuring that housing navigation services and housing sustainability services and ECM services and our providers were part of these case management roundtables, and that they were able to ensure that the coordination of care that not only within like tallying services, but that those members who were receiving tallying services were also were being connected to other housing resources that was part of that particular system of care. And that's a challenge, right? It's once you start looking to ensure that member, maybe they are receiving enhanced care management or housing navigation services, but now we want to make sure that they move into a unit, right? That's always the goal for us, right? As managed care plans, we're working with a member who's on houses. Ultimately, we want to make sure that they, are housed and they are able to receive the appropriate level of access to care, whether it's behavioral health or other physical care. But that coordination of care that happens outside of what we own, of that data or that process, that's what's different. And I think that's really, there's an opportunity to continue to work and leverage your COC and leverage CES as a mechanism to ensure that you can coordinate all those other different services that are happening outside of what you have control over. And we are getting a county coordinator in Fresno, Madera County as well with the COC. So the managed care plans with CalViva, help with Anthem and Kaiser have funded to implement that. So that should be that. I think they just onboarded him this month. And that's really kind of the goal, right? So again, when you're looking at where county is in terms of implementation, it's going to look different in each county. In Tulare County, I think just because of the relationship that we had with the COC, the fact that a lot of our local housing providers, contracted county housing providers were already doing those services, and really kind of connection and the coordination that we have with Tulare County together with health and the Tulare County Public Services Agency overall, it really did kind of help facilitate that.
started working with Tulare County to re-envision how people implement supportive housing, low barrier shelters, and everything in between got behavioral health services. And when Kingsview began meeting with the county, evaluating current state of how people got these services, we were able to identify and create together this really robust continuum that brought together enhanced care management, community supports, special mental health, and behavioral health services act. I will say that this unique operation that we've co-developed in this area, in this county, it allows us to take the position of taking care of people first and worrying about how we get paid afterwards. That's been a really important cornerstone of how we work. And the new program, the new suite of services that we offer to PSH and other sites across Tulare County, it's called field-based services. It includes specialty mental health. So every resident is eligible for a comprehensive mental health assessment, treatment planning, ongoing care that includes therapy, case management, and so on, as well as enhanced case management, enhanced care management, community supports that include transitional rent, and all the other services to make sure they keep and maintain their housing. The most important point is on the bottom of this list here, full service partnership. High touch, high fidelity services. People are seen 3 to 5 times a week, and their housing resources, the financial capacity to continue paying for housing, post-transitional rent, housing deposits, and all of that. There's room to make that happen because there's full service partnership level of care. This is a really unique program that we're excited to be part of, and we've been happy to make available in Tulare County. As part of that, we also make referrals to other services, primary care, Denti-Cal, drug Medi-Cal organized delivery system, individuals that need any kind of behavioral health, primary care, other social service, full wraparound. We have staff that are there at each one of these PSH sites 40 hours a week. And we're there because it needs to happen. Earlier in one of the other presentations, there was a mention of mandatory versus voluntary services. And I don't even know that Kingsview as a service provider thinks of these things in that way. We create a culture of recovery, and people are just compelled to be part of it for that reason. And so for that reason, that mandatory or not, we just care about them. We want them to get better and be part of their housing and not be there after 6 months, to go find somewhere stable on their own to live. So that is a little bit about Kingsview. Also, when I shoot on it, the last point about Kingsview, it's this is the new logo. So if it looks different than what you've seen in the past, making sure you know it's the same company. We just have rebranded it. You designed it.
That's your site.
Thank you. Yeah. Send an email to, follow me, so on. So full service partnerships, true enough, they are changing as a result of the Behavioral Health Services Act. These have been the cornerstone of behavioral health and housing services since the inception of MHSA, where there are mandatory populations that receive these services based on specific criteria. It is meant for high touch, high fidelity. The people requiring the most help, the illest of the ill, in and out of the psych units, and full service partnership services provide not just the actual service activity that was largely built through Medi-Cal, like ECM and community supports, but the MHSA and soon the DHSA funding for all the other stuff that people need to survive, whether it's housing, medications, tattoo removal if they need help finding a job. Certain counties have been funded buying a goat for culturally specific reasons. So MHSA, DHSA, though it's not an unlimited funding source, the intent of the funding is to make sure that people get what they need to have sustained recovery. I'm not the right person to talk about
Quick question.
Yeah.
So what I heard is like your charter is that being able to help people and is really dedicated to its services. How do you guys address the issue of actual housing and then making the connection of housing specialists and residency with your integration of your services?
So we, part of our enhanced care management community supports, we employ housing specialists. We have them on site. We've mulled over a few different service models where our behavioral health providers are dually housing navigators. And while there's probably viability for that long term, the amount of individuals in need in Tulare County, we saw just relevance of separating it out and having dedicated housing navigators and dedicated behavioral health specialists. I didn't catch the first part of your question, if you don't mind repeating. Or did I answer it?
we've talked about this. There's a lot of other systems of record. So all those bubbles, that web of network that people are connected to, we all have our own way of keeping track of what's happening with that person. So for me, we have our EHR, electronic health records, which probably all doctors have some version of that. So primary care, CalWorks is more like that eligibility thing. And then if anybody's justice involved, they have a whole different record that's housed by probation or law enforcement. Child welfare has their own state system. So tons of systems, they don't all talk to one another at all. There is some good work being done to start weaving these systems together on the back end, which is very cool, but we're not there yet. I just thought I'd call it out because there's definitely a need to try to coordinate with technology, and we're not there yet, but there's good momentum happening. Some future considerations or challenges that I think we all probably are very well aware of. We do have a new benefited transitional rent coming up in January, and the potential of flex pools where we try, potentially, we're kind of considering this in Tulare County, talking to Miguel and our other MCP counterparts about TRA and what that might look like, and how do we determine like who's eligible for it when it goes live, and then what that communication is going to look like when somebody exhausts that. We want to know about that and maybe kick in the other types of funding they're eligible for. So we're kind of figuring out a lot of like behind the scenes processes, and so that means, like I said, formal meetings, but also like lunches sometimes, or putting our heads together and just like trying to like pitch a lot of ideas because this space is continuing to evolve. So we have to pivot a lot, and the process is messy. Like we've had lots of good momentum, we've had stalls, we've had some back momentum. The partners in here that I talked with, probably would all acknowledge that it can be tricky and challenging. The data exchange I mentioned, like not all the systems talk together, so we're trying to figure that out. We need inventory. I think everybody knows like there's just not maybe enough affordable houses. More meaning still, no matter. I mean, there's a lot of growth that's happened, but we still need more. And along with that, some of the other funding that goes along with helping somebody sustain housing. So those are still problems that we all are aware of and trying to juggle. I wish I had all the magical solutions. I know today, but I just thought I would just call those out. Like those are things that are on our mind too, as we were trying to design our systems and maybe make changes organizationally. We try to do it with some of these challenges in mind and figuring out how can we do the work better tomorrow. One final thought, and then we might have a couple minutes for other questions. I'm going to share a story some of you guys are probably familiar with. I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, but the story goes, there was an ancient teacher who had been teaching a crowd of people, a large crowd of people for a few days, like thousands more. And after a while, they became hungry, which, that makes sense. Anybody gone to a festival or something? Like, yeah, you got to eat and drink, and you might run out. So people started kind of like grumbling. The people closest to this teacher came to them and said, hey, everybody's hungry. What should we do? He's like, oh, go ahead, take care of it. They're like, how? We don't have anything. So, they did a little bit of crowdsourcing, and sure enough, they came up with something. A little boy happened to have a lunch with him still. He had some fish and some bread. And they're like, hey, here's what we've got. This little boy is offering up his fish and his bread. And so the teacher said, okay, great, you're going to hand that to me. And as the teacher took it and began to divide it out, and divide it out, and divide it out, turns out the whole crowd was fed with extra. And the reason I shared that today is I just talked about the challenges and the deficits and the gaps. Like, yes, part of that is true, but I also believe that if we are all willing to come to the table and bring what we've got, that something kind of maybe amazing and miraculous can happen. Some would say there was a miracle that happened that day, which I think there was,